Chapter 519. Master Liao's walking posture was still as arrogant as ever. In addition, he was not very intelligent. He was just a spoiled brat who relied on the protection of his ancestors. He could not tell what was going on. Every time he entered and left the yamen, he was very casual. In addition, his uncle who loved him the most was sitting at the top, so he had nothing to worry about. When he saw Baligaj's expression, he immediately said, "Why is this private advisor released? Uncle, he bullied me the most in the past. He has no manners at all and only knows how to slander others." You. Elder Hellion did not manage to say the word "shut up." The retired emperor who was sitting at the side calmly interrupted him. "Oh? Why is he slandering others? When we were in Fuping County, he made a lot of fake evidence and slandered me. If that's not slandering others, then what is?" Master Liao said while shaking his legs. "I know he dares to be so presumptuous because he has the support of the Qin family. Otherwise, how could he be qualified to arrest me? He's just an insignificant private advisor, yet he knows how to rely on others to show off. I've seen too many people like him. They rely on their faces to make themselves look decent, but in fact they are very poor." Elder Hellion could not hold it in anymore. He stood up with a loud bang. The retired emperor only took a sip of tea and said with a cold gaze, "Sit down and listen to your nephew." Elder Hellion could not help but clench his teeth. He knew what the retired emperor meant. He was not allowed to interrupt. He did not think much of Xiao Yu's words in the past. He only had one nephew. Of course he had to pamper him. But now he couldn't wait to give him a tight slap to shut him up. He was simply a brainless pig. Was he so stupid that he could not even see the situation now? No matter how turbulent Elder Hellion's heart was, the arrogance that Master Liao had cultivated since he was young had long made him develop the habit of thinking that he was the biggest boss in the world. He didn't know the identity of the person sitting next to his uncle. He also didn't hear what the retired emperor said just now. He thought that the person was just a new official from the provincial capital that he hadn't seen before, so he didn't take him too seriously. Seeing him like this, Hellion Vivian curled her lips and said, "According to what you said, did we convict you or wrongly accuse you? You know very well whether I was wronged or not." Master Liao looked at Hellion Vivian with disdain. "Wei, I didn't want to argue with you at first, but you kept coming up to me and asking for a slap in the face. You're always thinking of punishing me, but in the end this young master was still released. Instead, I'm afraid that your Grand Master will have to squat inside after the interrogation. Let me tell you, this is the difference. Don't forget that you always act like you're so cool. Who do you think you are? You're just a stupid scholar from a small place." Speaking of this, he turned around and looked at Elder Helen. "Uncle, this Wei guy isn't fit to be an official at all. When he was in Fuping County, he hooked up with a village girl and tried his best to stand up for her. For the sake of that village girl, he asked his Grand Master to accuse me of perjury and locked me and my father up. You must punish him." "Shut up." This time Elder Hellion finally shouted out the words that he wanted to say. However, his expression had also turned extremely ugly. After shouting, the first thing he did was to apologize to the retired emperor who was next to him. He, who didn't sweat all this time, finally understood what it meant to have weak legs. "Old Emperor, it's this old official's fault. This old official didn't teach my subordinates well. However, this child Xiao Yu really doesn't have any intention of harming others. It's just that he's really good at hiding things when he speaks. This old official begs you to be magnanimous and forgive this child this once. Furthermore, Xiao Yu wasn't completely bluffing. According to this old official's information, Lord Wei was indeed very close to a local village girl when he was in Fuping County. It's hard not to be suspicious." Elder Hellion said this in an attempt to divert the retired emperor's attention. However, it was this sentence that made him completely fall for it. Hellion Wei opened her mouth unhurriedly. "Elder Hellion's meaning is that I'm the one who should be punished, while Elder's nephew is merely a little insensible, nothing more. Child? Elder Hellion, you've really made it sound nice. Young Master Liao is almost in his 20s this year, right? How can you call him a child? A giant baby?" As soon as she finished speaking, the entire yamen burst into laughter. No matter how stupid young Master Liao was, he could hear the mockery in Hellion Vivian's words. His flat face flushed red, and he was so angry that his chest heaved up and down. "Wei, who are you calling a giant baby? It's obvious that I'm talking about you." Hellion Vivian looked at him with pity. "You can't even understand such obvious words. Indeed, you're like a giant baby. It's not the size, it's the IQ. Young Master Liao pointed at her. Elder Hellion was afraid that he would say something outrageous again, so he took the initiative to speak. Lord Wei, you've made this old one even more suspicious after saying so much. If you're not related to that village girl, why are you so agitated? I'm not agitated, Elder Hellion. This is the second time you've slandered me today. I think it's time for me to prove my innocence, Hellion Vivian said while handsomely removing the half-mask on her face. A familiar face instantly entered Elder Hellion's eyes. How could it be her? Elder Hellion took a heavy step back and sat back down on the wooden chair in a dispirited manner. His expression was as if he had seen a ghost. His face was 10 times worse than when he saw Beligaju. At this moment he realized what a fatal mistake he had made. The other officials had never been to the capital, so they did not understand why Elder Hellion suddenly became like this. However, they were all very smart and knew how to observe people's expressions. Looking at Elder Hellion's expression, they knew that there must be some unforeseen circumstances. Otherwise he wouldn't be like this. Could it be that this Lord Wei also has another identity? Before the officials could figure it out, Hellion Vivian laughed softly. Elder Yun, it's been a long time. You didn't attend the headquarters last time. This time we met in the provincial capital. I'd like to ask Elder Yun, what do you think I have to do with another girl? This rhetorical question made Elder Hellion feel a burning sensation on his face. He wished he could find a hole in the ground and bury himself in it. Chapter 520. This is all a misunderstanding. Elder Hellion did not expect it to be her. He was stuttering. Not only him but all the stewards in the capital city thought she was in the imperial palace at the moment and was at her wits' end because of her status. No one would have thought that she would disguise herself as a man and go to Fuping to become a county magistrate. No wonder the royal family would become a private advisor. It was all because of her. Elder Hellion finally understood everything, but it was too late. However, Master Liao was still clueless about the situation. He tugged at Elder Hellion's sleeve and said, "Uncle, why are you being so polite to her? She's just a county magistrate. Shut up. I'll say it one more time. Shut up." Elder Hellion's demeanor was completely gone as he bellowed furiously. Master Liao, who had never been so fierce before, was stunned. He did not understand where he had gone wrong. Elder Hellion took a deep breath. When he met Hellion Vivian's eyes, he had no choice but to flatter her. "It's my fault that I didn't recognize eldest Mississippi, eldest Miss. Wasn't that the legendary successor of the Hellion family, Hellion Vivian? It was said that she was once a good-for-nothing who was despised by everyone and did not have any martial chi. However, half a year ago she suddenly rose up and returned to the Hellion family. She defeated her father in one fell swoop and became the new clan leader of the Hellion family. She was married to the royal family and became the princess consort. She was a winner in life. Her talent in making martial arts could be said to be a genius among geniuses. Everyone in the Dragon War Empire knew about the profound heavens that she founded. The officials did not expect that the Bayview seafood restaurant that they had blocked and ridiculed countless times would have such a background. Once again the officials felt a chill from the bottom of their hearts. Their lips turned pale and they did not know what to do. No matter how stupid Master Liao was, he knew what the words eldest miss meant. Although he had never been to the Hellion family, he had always been aware of the recent happenings in the Hellion family. The young lady of the Hellion family, Hellion Vivian, was the current princess consort. He actually said that something would happen between the princess consort and a village girl. What could happen to two women? When Master Liao thought of this, he fell to his knees with a thud. He reached out his hand and tried to pull on the corner of Hellion Vivian's robe. "Miss, uncle is right. This is all a misunderstanding. If I had known your identity, you wouldn't have bumped into me and made me apologize to you, right?" Hellion Vivian said flatly, "You won't keep saying how poor my advisor is, right?" Hearing Hellion Vivian's last sentence, Master Liao's face turned completely pale. He thought about what he had just said. How he wished he could slap himself. However, the black-bellied His Highness added, "It's a pity that I'm not poor. I think young Master Liao still doesn't know my identity. Your uncle only found out today, so I'll share it with you so that you can die a happier death. Guards, take him away." Master Liao was dumbfounded. His face was full of snot and tears. He no longer had the arrogant look he had just now. He was in an extremely sorry state. Then there was a heart-wrenching cry. "Uncle, save me! Save me!" All the officials understood what it meant to take him away. It meant that he would most likely die. Elder Hellion wanted to plead for mercy for his nephew, but he was afraid that he would be implicated. He could only watch helplessly as Master Liao was taken away with bloodshot eyes. He clenched his fists tightly. When he thought of the plan that the 3 elders in the capital city mentioned, a murderous look appeared in his eyes. "Xiaoyu, you should leave. Uncle will avenge you. When we return to the palace, Uncle will make this Hellion Vivian die a horrible death." The 3 people from the Liao family were all killed in just one afternoon. Magistrate Liao was the last one to be brought in. When he saw Elder Hulian's expression, he knew that everything was over. However, he still thought that there was some leeway. In fact, there was no leeway in front of the royal family. His methods were too ruthless. Every layer of thought was so meticulous that it was frightening. Like a hunting snake, he made people fall into the trap step by step and then swallowed them whole. The death of the 3 people from the Liao family made the yamen fall into silence. At the same time, it also made every official breathe a sigh of relief. Since the person was already dead, this case was definitely over. This was good too. They would not dig deeper. Otherwise, there were not many people sitting here who were truly clean. The officials looked at each other and were secretly happy that they had escaped a disaster. They had to admit that they had underestimated His Highness. Since His Highness wanted to kill them all, how could he stop here? Bailey Jiaju sat directly on General Liao's seat with his slender legs slightly crossed. He looked noble and elegant, and his expression was indifferent. "I have a list of names here as well. I'm sure all of you will be very interested after reading it." Someone wanted to take the opportunity to flatter and said with a smile, "The things that His Highness gives are usually good things." "It is indeed a good thing." Baligaju curved his thin lips devilishly. However, when the list was placed in front of them, the few officials from the provincial capital could no longer smile. His legs turned to jelly and he fell to the ground. He did not care about his image as he shouted, "Your Highness, these are all baseless rumors. We are all innocent. It was all Liao Tingtian's doing, Your Highness." "Unfounded matters?" Bailey Jiaju laughed, but it was not warm at all. Instead, it was chilling like a shadow. "You know very well what you did outside the Bayview seafood restaurant on the day Magistrate Liao was released. Shadow, ask all the lords to open their eyes wide and take a good look at the amount of silvers written on the list. Ask them where the silvers went. If they can answer, spare their lives. If they can't, kill them." Baligaju said casually. However, the officials trembled when they heard the word kill. Someone could not control himself and shouted, "Your Highness, I will confess everything. It's my fault for taking the money, but we have to do this. It's not easy for us to be local officials. We have to pay our respects to the higher-ups every year. Sometimes the salary given by the imperial court is not enough. Moreover, the Liao family is the tyrant in the provincial capital. We can only side with them. Bayview Seafood Restaurant may seem to be the property of the Liao family, but in fact, the one who is controlling the whole situation is Elder Hellion, who is sitting on your left." Clang. Chapter 521. In an instant the atmosphere in the yamen froze. The officials did not expect that someone would expose Elder Hellion. When Elder Hellion heard his name, he clenched the handle of the chair under his palm. He tried his best to make himself look like he did not care about what that person said. This was because he knew clearly. At this point, even if someone were to accuse him, it would not have much effect if there was no conclusive evidence. However, if he panicked at this moment, everything would be over. Compared to him, the retired emperor was calmer. It was as if whatever he heard did not have much of an effect on this wise and farsighted emperor. He casually tilted his head and asked, "What does Elder Yun want to say?" "Retired emperor, ever since I became an elder, this is not the only time I have been slandered. Now that the family is so big, I can't control what my subordinates do." Elder Hellion said slowly, "Some people don't have the ability to distinguish. When they hear my name, they blindly believe it. This has created many opportunities for some lawbreakers. Now that this has happened, it is inevitable that some people will suspect me. After all, the Liao family is related to me. Therefore, I would like to ask this lord, do you have any evidence to prove that I am in charge of the operation of Bayview Seafood Restaurant?" Upon hearing this, that person anxiously looked at his colleagues who were kneeling beside him. Those people shook their heads at him. They all knew that Elder Hellion was clearly asking the obvious. Back then, everything was discussed at the dining table. There was no specific written agreement. Even the silver taels distributed by the Bayview Seafood Restaurant had reached Elder Hellion's hands through other means. Unless someone could get hold of the accounts of the Bayview Seafood Restaurant and the Yamen immediately, they might be able to find out the missing silver taels. However, the silver taels had been divided up in an unseen way. It was impossible for them to take it out immediately. You have nothing to say, right? Elder Hellion sneered. I knew this would be the result. Speaking of this, he turned his head and looked at Beligaju. Your Highness, I will admit to what I have done. It is indeed my fault that I am unable to discipline my subordinates. However, this old man is not someone who would harm the common people for money. This old man doesn't know the rules of the Ministry of Personnel, but if you want to accuse me of doing bad things, you should at least provide evidence. This lord doesn't have any evidence at all, yet he's already slandering this old man. This has already negatively affected this old man's reputation. I hope that your Highness will give this old man justice. When the man heard this, he suddenly became agitated. You're lying. Your Highness. Don't listen to him. He was lying. I'm telling the truth. Back then, when I came to the provincial capital, I also wanted to be a good official. But later, because I knew that the roots of the provincial capital were too deep and I couldn't afford to offend them, I had no choice but to wallow in the mire with them. Elder Hellion even promised us personally at Bayview Seafood Restaurant that as long as we don't reveal the secret of Bayview Seafood Restaurant, our future official career will be smooth sailing. My lord, this old man has to say that you've really put in a lot of effort to get yourself out of this crime. Elder Hellion glanced at the group of people around him. If what you said is true, that this old man had once warned all of you at Bayview Seafood Restaurant, why is there only one person who is testifying against me now? That person looked to the left and right again, then said to his colleague on the left, Lord Lee, say something. You were there at that time, weren't you? Aye. That person surnamed Lee's eyes drifted. When he saw Elder Hellion's face, he shifted his gaze to the side. Lord Zhang, could it be that you remembered wrongly? Elder Hellion did come that day, but I drank too much and forgot about it. I don't think Elder Hellion said anything. That official surnamed Zhang was dumbfounded. You clearly responded at that time. How could you have drunk too much? I really don't remember. Officer Lee lowered his head. Elder Hellion's smile became colder. He said confidently, Lord Zhang, this old man isn't close to you and we have no grudges against each other. Yet you want to frame me like this. Others have already said that it's not the case, but you still insist on forcing others to give false testimony with you. A despicable person like you would be doing a good deed for the people if you die. Officer Zhang didn't care about what Elder Hellion said. He just grabbed Officer Lee's collar and said, Why don't you tell the truth? Why? We've already come to this point. Anyway, we can't live anymore. Why don't we just drag down the people who are harming us? Just like what Officer Zhang said, he did want to be a good official. But sometimes he couldn't help it and fell deeper and deeper. Now he wanted to do the right thing before he died, but he realized that it was still so difficult. This was because the influence of the aristocratic families on the officials was too great. They had reached a certain level. Officer Lee raised his head and looked at him. There was a lot of apology in his eyes. But in order to save his life, he could only say this. He really wanted to persuade Officer Zhang to think carefully. There was a reason why everyone didn't say anything. If it was just a crime of corruption, they would at most be sentenced to exile at the border. But if they offended Elder Hellion, they couldn't produce solid evidence. In the end, it was very likely that the other party would be fine, and they would directly lose their lives. It was clear at a glance which result was lighter. All the officials knelt on the ground one after another. Obviously, any one of them could stand up and testify for Officer Zhang. But no one was willing to provoke the fire. Elder Hellion was very satisfied with their obedience. Of course, there were also disobedient ones. Elder Hellion opened his eyes coldly. That's enough, Officer Zhang. This act will go too far. Officer Zhang clenched his fists and slammed them on the ground. Elder Hellion laughed mockingly in his heart, but on the surface he was wronged. Your Highness, it's up to you. Beligaju met his gaze and narrowed his long and narrow eyes slightly. Elder Hellion didn't retreat at all. He knew this man's methods, but so what if he only had methods? He didn't understand the people's hearts and the officialdom. He still couldn't do anything to him. Baligaju looked at him for a full 3 seconds, then said calmly, "An put Officer Zhang in prison. I will interrogate him later." Yes. An respectfully accepted the order. Elder Hellion curled his thin lips and glanced at Officer Zhang with a complacent look. Officer Zhang was completely dispirited. The others were thinking as expected. Fortunately, they weren't as stupid as Officer Zhang, jumping out to accuse Elder He. However, Baligaju's next sentence made everyone's expression change. He said, "He doesn't have evidence, but I do." Chapter 522. That's impossible. Elder Huyen's body trembled. But he discovered that Bailey Jiaju was looking down at him. The corners of his mouth curved up, his long and narrow eyes were filled with ridicule, that aloof and noble appearance, as if he was looking at a prey that was on the verge of death. This feeling caused Elder Hellion to feel extremely uneasy. Baligaju's voice was still as deep and pleasant as usual. "Elder Yun, do you really think that the Yaman's dungeon can lock me up?" Upon hearing this, Hellion Vivian turned to look at the man beside her. Needless to say, it definitely can't lock him up. Not to mention that His Highness was always interested in locks and chains. He even wanted a cage on the dragon bed in his palace. Even if he was not interested, he could break the iron door in front of him into pieces with a lift of his hand. Not to mention a lock. Therefore, on this day it was very likely that a certain highness would open the lock on his own, and then use his superb qinggong to walk out of the dungeon for a walk without the slightest scruple. Then he would return to the cell and lock himself up. Yes, this does seem like something he would do. The more Hellion Vivian thought about it, the more she felt that it was possible. She took another look at Baligaju. Elder Hellion wasn't a fool either. On the contrary, he was very clear about the terrifying extent of the third prince's martial qi that was standing before him. Not to mention the Yaman's dungeon, even the world-famous Shaolin Temple's 18 bronze net formation could not trap this man who had conquered the entire empire many years ago. Thinking of this, Elder Hellion felt an inexplicable chill at the back of his neck. Since he could have walked out long ago, why did he have to wait until the Yaman opened? Unless this was the moment he was waiting for. The answer that came out of nowhere made Elder Huyen's eyes shrink. Baligaju rubbed the silver ring on his index finger with a faint smile. "I know very well when you came to the provincial capital and when you met Liao Qingtian. After all, every time Liao Qingtian interrogated me, he had to go somewhere else. So, you voluntarily went to prison not only to make Liao Qingtian die a horrible death, but also to make it easier to follow General Liao. It was too immoral." Hellion Vivian and He Eyes silently looked at each other. The only person who could be so shameless was probably His Highness. How tragic was Liao Qingtian? Until his death, he did not know that His Highness had followed him. That's why it's best not to play mind games with His Highness. You'll be ruined. "Third brother, you're amazing." Little Seven had a domineering look on his little tiger face. He was always full of admiration for his third brother. This kind of people should be dealt with like this. Eunuch's son began to consider whether he should raise the seventh prince separately from the royal family. After all, the seventh prince was too young. If he was raised astray at such a young age, it would be too worrisome. Although these two had never let him off easy. "You personally told Liao Qingtian to get rid of all the people who had a grudge against Bayview Seafood Restaurant. That's why the murder in the long alley happened." Baligaju said slowly, "You underestimate Our Lady Vivian. Do you think you can do whatever you want with her around?" "I'm actually being praised." Hellion Vivian glanced at Baligaju. As an arms tycoon, of course, she would not allow anyone to mess around. That's the standard. Baligaju looked at her proud little face. He held back the smile at the corner of his mouth and reached out to pull her over. At this moment, Elder Huyen's face had lost all color. This is royal family's words. It can't be used as evidence. It seems like Elder Hellion wants me to give you a quick death. Baligaju glanced sideways at Shadow, who was standing behind him. "This is the cup that you personally passed to Liao Qingtian when you just arrived at the provincial capital." Shadow was holding a transparent glass bottle in his hand. A red worm was lying quietly in the glass bottle. The worm was not big, but it looked extremely terrifying because of the two pincers in front of it. Baligaju smiled. "I'll return it to you now." As he spoke, he uncorked the bottle with his slender fingers and poured the liquid on Elder Huyen's arm. Elder Hellion did not have time to react. The worm quickly drilled into his skin. No. Elder Hellion did not care about anything else. He pulled the attendant beside him and shouted in horror, "Hurry up and find Liao Qingtian's body. There's an antidote on him. Hurry up." However, it was too late. The worm crawled along the blood. Once it tasted the blood, its crawling speed would be even faster. The rumbling sounds made the scalps of all the officials go numb. In just a few seconds, Elder Hulian's gaze changed. He stared blankly in front of him and lost all consciousness. Beligaju asked calmly, "Who's the real boss behind Bayview Seafood Restaurant?" "It's me." Elder Hulian raised his head slowly. Boom. The yamen was in an uproar. When the officials heard the word "me," they sat on the ground completely paralyzed. The situation could not be clearer. They were all done for. The retired emperor stood up and glanced at Beligaju. He announced in a deep voice, "Pass down my order." Hulian Yun massacred the people for his own selfish desires. He formed a clique and plotted to murder the crown prince. He should be punished according to his crime. From today onwards, thoroughly investigate the officials who are related to Bayview Seafood Restaurant. Find them all, regardless of whether they are from the provincial capital or the capital city. Yes. A clear voice resounded throughout the yamen. Eunuch Sun glanced at the officials on the ground. What about these people? Let third brother decide. The retired emperor was tired. It was not his body that was tired but his heart. He had always known that there were problems in the empire ever since he abdicated. However, what made him disappointed was that a small Bayview seafood restaurant had implicated so many people. There were many things that he did not know about. The 4 influential families could not be left alive. If they were to stay, the empire would be destroyed. Eunuch Sun naturally noticed the displeasure in the retired emperor's heart. He replied, "Yes." Then he walked to Beligaju and whispered a few words. After Beligaju heard him, he glanced at him indifferently. What's the point of keeping people who don't even dare to testify? The meaning of this sentence was very clear. It was because they understood it too well. That was why those officials were so regretful that they wished they could go back in time. It turned out that they were the ones who were truly foolish. If they were like official Zhang, they would have stood up and said something when it was time to do so. At least they could have kept their lives. Now, they had no choice but to die. The Liao family, who had dominated the provincial capital for many years, finally came to an end. It was said that on the day these officials were beheaded, every family was so happy that they set off firecrackers. The merchants who wanted to thank Helian Vivian lined up from the yamen entrance to the end. Chapter 523. 2 of them were the ones that Helian Vivian met in Bayview restaurant when she first came to the provincial capital. Helian Vivian called them to the inner yamen and asked De Xiong to prepare tea for them. Little Seven sat beside Helian Vivian and stared at the crabs in the hands of the 2 men. The 2 men were smart. Although they did not know Little Seven's identity, they untied one of the crabs and passed it to him when they saw the child's expression. Initially, they wanted to give it to the child to play with. After all, the crabs were still alive. Unexpectedly, the Little Seven Prince received it politely. After thanking them, he opened his mouth and took a bite. "That's raw." The 2 men were stunned and quickly shouted, "You can't eat it." The Little Seventh Prince furrowed his pair of tiger-like eyebrows as he looked at the crab in his hand that was trembling in fear. After thinking for a while, he finally handed it over to Helian Weiwei and said, "Third aunt, let's steam it tonight. If we eat it like this, it doesn't taste as good." The 2 men's lips twitched. "This taste is not the main point. How can one be enough for you?" Helian Vivian took out her handkerchief and wiped the corner of the little one's mouth. "After I'm done with my work, I'll make 100 of them. 50 of them will be steamed and 50 of them will be stir-fried. I think you'll like it." The Little Seven Prince nodded. He was so obedient that it was unlike him. Eunuch Sun was already in tears. So this was the ultimate move to deal with the 7th Prince. He should have done the same thing when he was biting the goldfish. Helian Vivian rubbed the little one's head and then looked into the eyes of the 2 men. "I invited the 2 of you here because I want to ask for your help. Lord Wei, you're too polite. If you have anything to say, just tell us." One of them was still as righteous as ever. "Lord Wei, you have helped us to vent our anger. Not only did you deal with those corrupt officials, you even shut down the Bayview Seafood Restaurant. That was simply too satisfying. Why are you still saying that you'll help us?" The other person didn't say anything. Instead, he reached out and tugged at his sleeve as if saying something. That person turned around and raised his eyebrows in confusion. Brother Wang, why do you keep pulling my sleeve? Didn't you hear that child call her third sister-in-law? The one surnamed Wang lowered his voice and his expression changed. Is it really like what the villagers said? Lord Wei she is a woman? Hellion Vivian laughed. I am indeed a woman, but this shouldn't affect our previous cooperation. Of course it won't. The two of them answered in unison, but they were a little confused about Hellion Vivian's identity. But how can a woman be a superior? Eunuch Sun smiled and replied, since the princess consort wants to be, she's here to be. Princess. The two men were dumbfounded. After regaining their senses, they immediately knelt on the ground. This humble one has eyes but failed to recognize Mount Tai. I hope that the princess consort. Before they could finish, Hellion Vivian helped them up. You don't have to do this. However, Brotherly was wrong just now. Bayview restaurant won't be closed. Won't be closed. The two of them frowned subconsciously. Why? Didn't we investigate it thoroughly? Why would we keep such a harmful restaurant? Hellion Vivian nodded and smiled. Not only will it not be closed, I will make it bigger. What do you mean? Hellion Vivian played with the jade pendant in her hand. From today onwards, I will officially take over Bayview restaurant. After all, it's an old shop in the War Dragon Empire. Many merchants come to the provincial capital for Bayview restaurant. The provincial capital is the only coastal city in the north. Most of the people rely on seafood for a living. Bayview restaurant's closure may be satisfying, but in the long run, the disadvantages will outweigh the benefits. Without the restaurant's purchase, the people will not be able to sell their seafood at a good price. In the end, the people will be the ones to suffer. Little Vivian is so thoughtful. A slightly deep voice sounded from outside the door. The little seventh prince turned around, picked up the crab and ran to the old man. Grandfather. The retired emperor patted his grandson's head. When he looked at Hellion Vivian, he showed an appreciative smile. Hellion Vivian also stood up. She was neither servile nor overbearing, but she showed respect to the old man. Grandfather, this is probably the reason why you didn't make the decision to close down Bayview restaurant. Compared to grandfather's consideration for the country and the people, what I did is nothing. You little brat. The retired emperor laughed. Based on what you said, you should have a solution. Go ahead and do it. If you need the cooperation of any department, just mention it to me. Okay. Hellion Vivian responded with a smile. After so many things happened, the retired emperor was already busy. He would not stay here for long. After he finished giving instructions to Hellion Vivian, he returned to the capital city with eunuch Sunday. Hellion Vivian turned around and continued to talk to the two merchants. Both of you know about seafood and business. Are you willing to stay in the provincial capital and be the stewards of my reopening of Bayview restaurant? Yes. We are willing. At that moment, the two merchants felt as if a pie had fallen from the sky and hit their heads. How could they not be willing? She was the boss of Profound Heaven, the person who created a miracle in the business world. In their line of work, being able to follow her was definitely a blessing of 3 lifetimes. Then let's start with the selection of seafood. Hellion Vivian's thin lips curled up. The Yamen will release an announcement at noon, asking all the fishermen to deliver their goods at the entrance of Bayview restaurant. When the time comes, we will select the seafood on the spot. It must be big, fresh and plump. Only then will the shrimp and crabs be delicious. No problem. Leave it to us. The two merchants were not the kind to drag their feet. They immediately went to prepare. At this moment, Hellion Vivian gave an order that puzzled everyone. Move the big iron pot used for cooking to the entrance of Bayview restaurant. Prepare the chopping board and firewood, coarse ginger, garlic, salt, vinegar and sugar. All the seasonings must not be left out. The most important thing is to get more chili and peanuts. Do it now and do it quickly. De Xiong and Chen Liang looked at each other and then said, yes. However, they kept muttering in their hearts. What was their boss going to do? Move the big iron pot to the entrance of the restaurant? Wasn't it just blocking the door? Would anyone still come to eat then? Chapter 524. At noon, the sun was shining brightly and the wind was blowing gently. The news of the reopening of Bayview Seafood Restaurant gave the people in the provincial capital an indescribable feeling. When Bayview Seafood Restaurant collapsed, they were happier than anyone else. The big bully in the provincial capital was finally eradicated. But now someone said that it would reopen. Wouldn't the result be the same no matter who reopened it? By then it would be another scammer. All the businessmen would be scared away and the provincial capital would never be able to develop. In the end, the ones who would not be able to live a good life would be the fishermen who relied on the land and the sea. However, what made them hesitate was that the new boss of Bayview Seafood Restaurant was buying seafood at a high price. Moreover, he was paying for the seafood at the entrance of Bayview Seafood Restaurant under the watchful eyes of the public. This was something that had never happened before. They had sent a lot of seafood to Bayview Seafood Restaurant, but they were never forced to buy it. Sometimes when they finally got something good, a lobster that should be worth 5 taels of silver, the other party would only give them 1 tael of silver and send them away. It was because these things happened in the kitchen and no one from the higher-ups cared about it. Now they were paying for the seafood at a high price. Many people were tempted, but they did not dare to approach Bayview Seafood Restaurant because of its reputation. They could only look around at the entrance. On the second floor of the restaurant, Helene Vivian was drinking tea near the window. She was holding a porcelain cup in one hand and supporting her chin with the other. Her starry eyes were looking out of the window. "It's almost time," Helene Vivian said as she stood up and stretched lazily. "Take the pot and let's go out." De Xiong and Qin Liang nodded. They walked over and wanted to carry the big iron pot out together. However, before they could bend down, the little one had already picked up the big iron pot with one hand. His little tiger face turned around and looked at them adorably with a meat bun in his mouth. De Xiong and Qin Liang were speechless. "What are you waiting for?" Helene Vivian walked over and raised her eyebrows. De Xiong immediately burst into tears. "Sob, sob, sob. Boss, we lost again. The 7th Highness is clearly a baby who can't even walk properly. How can he have such great strength? How could they 3-foot-tall men survive?" It was a complete defeat. Hearing this, Helene Vivian smiled wickedly and comforted her 2 subordinates. "It's okay. He's still young. You're 15 years apart. No matter how outstanding he is, he won't come out and steal your girl." De Xiong and Qin Liang were speechless. Why was it that the more boss spoke, the more they felt like they were failures in life? "Third sister-in-law, I've also helped you get the firewood over there." The little 7th prince was always full of vigor. He spoke like a calm little adult. De Xiong and Qin Liang. "Your Highness, put it down. Let the 2 of us take the firewood." "Yes, let's do it. I can't continue to be so dispirited. I have to show my value." The little 7th prince calmed down and said with a domineering look in his eyes, "Then be careful, don't scatter 3rd aunt's firewood." "No, how could we?" Clang. De Xiong and Qin Liang looked at the firewood on the ground because of their tugging and were petrified. "So stupid." The little one glanced at the 2 of them and didn't say anything more. He straightened his body and straightened his legs. Using the tip of his foot, he picked up the firewood one by one and placed it on his shoulder. Then he put the pile of firewood on his shoulder and carried it out just like that. Therefore, the scene that people saw was a little one walking in front with firewood on his left shoulder and an iron pot in his right hand. Behind him were 2 big men who didn't carry anything. Seeing this, Governor Chen pulled his son over. "Liang, how could you let the little 7th prince carry so many things by himself?" Qin Liang opened his mouth and wanted to explain. "Let's not talk about his identity. He's still a child. How did I teach you? You must know how to respect the old and love the young. You've disappointed me." Qin Liang didn't say a word. He felt that the gazes around were basically the same as his father's. They were all about crusading against him. "Little 7th prince, sob sob, please come and help me." The little 7th prince didn't have time to talk to him. He surrounded Helene Vivian and pointed at the crab. "Third sister-in-law, the crab that Grandpa is holding is big. It looks delicious." Helene Vivian followed his finger and looked over. She said faintly, "Grandpa, are you selling your crab?" Her tone was cold, but she didn't lose her manners. It was normal business and she wouldn't treat him differently because of the other party's identity. The grandpa didn't expect that the boss who reopened Bayview Seafood Restaurant was Lord Wei, who overthrew the Liao family. He felt more complicated and hesitant. Helene Vivian didn't force him. "Grandpa, you can think about it for a while." She turned around and whispered, "De Xiong, Qin Liang, prepare the firewood and light the pot." Yes. This time the 2 of them were very active. One of them was mainly responsible for isolating the little 7th prince. The other one was only responsible for preparing the firewood and lighting the pot. This time they couldn't let the little seventh prince take away their jobs. Otherwise they would definitely be spurned to death. As it turned out, De Xiong and Qin Liang were thinking too much. The little seventh prince didn't have time to pay attention to them. He was staring at the crabs, shrimps, and seaweed with his big eyes. There were only 2 words in his mind. Food. These are all food. The first piece of firewood was lit. Everyone looked over at Bayview Seafood Restaurant. Most of them were curious about why Helly and Vivian brought out a big pot. On the contrary, the 2 merchants from before looked at each other, then placed the wooden buckets in front of Helly and Wei Wei. These are the freshest ones. There's a sea fish, 2 lobsters and crabs. My lady, the situation is more complicated than we thought. The villagers aren't very willing to do this business because of the Bayview Seafood Restaurant incident. Yes, I can understand. Helly and Wei Wei's tone was calm, as if she had already expected such a situation. Don't worry, someone will come to do business with us very soon. You guys put this barrel in front of the chopping board first. Yes. Everyone had something to do. Even the little seventh prince was squatting on the ground and watching the 2 crabs crawling around. At first, the shadows were worried that the little seventh prince would eat whatever he saw. Now that they saw the situation, they were relieved. Then they knelt down on one knee and reported, "Master, everything is normal." In the opposite tea house, Bailey Jiaju played with the porcelain cup in his hand. His black phoenix eyes slowly swept across the crowd below. The corners of his mouth curved up, and his voice imperceptibly revealed an air of nobility. She brought out all the pots and pans, and you call that normal? Chapter 525. The problem was that he didn't know what the princess was going to do. Just as An Ing was in a dilemma, there was a bang outside the window. 3 knives appeared in Helly and Vivian's hands. Each knife had a different shape, but they were all beautiful and eye-catching. She took one of the long knives and 3 wooden sticks. She sharpened one end and aligned the length of the stick. Then she bent down and scooped up the fish from the wooden barrel. Her movements were very fast, and in a flash she had already removed the scales from the lively fish. Compared to freshwater fish, this kind of fish had almost negligible bones. Its flesh was plump and delicious. But the prerequisite was that one had to be able to control its taste. Is Lord Wei cooking? Is he cooking by himself? She removed the scales so quickly. Wait a minute, why isn't the fish in the pot? Whoosh. Helly and Vivian indeed didn't put the fish in the pot. Instead, she quickly cut the fish and skewered it with the 3 wooden sticks. Then she placed the fish on the fire. Helly and Vivian did these things very skillfully. It didn't look like it was her first time cooking. She held the brush in her left hand and dipped it in the sauce and sesame oil that she had prepared. Then she brushed it over the fish. With a sizzling sound, a faint fishy fragrance wafted out. The commoners frowned. After all, eating seafood was about the original taste. Wouldn't it be a waste to roast such a good sea fish like this? Just as everyone was doubting, Helly and Vivian picked up the second knife. She chopped the scallions, ginger, and garlic into powder. Then she added the celery and garlic sprouts. The oil in the pot was already heated. Once the food was added, it bloomed in the pot. In just an instant, a fragrance spread throughout the entire street. People couldn't help but take a deep breath. Originally, Helly and Vivian didn't do these things. It was just the simplest stir-frying steps. However, the key was in the last step. She added the peanuts and chili together. She quickly stir-fried them. A fragrant and spicy smell burst out in an instant. It made people want to smell it with all their might. After that, her movements were even faster. After stir-frying the celery and garlic sprouts, it was time to add the mushrooms. In ancient times, very few people would argue about which kinds of mushrooms were poisonous and which weren't. So when Helly and Vivian threw the mushrooms into the pot, everyone was shocked. But towards the end, when the unique smell of the shiitake mushroom assaulted their nostrils, they immediately felt a burst of hunger. The little girl was standing beside Helly and Vivian, standing on her tiptoes as she looked at the delicious dishes in the pot. She was almost drooling. Not to mention little Seven, even Qin Liang came over. "Boss, what are you making? It smells so good. I love the Duke brand of roasted fish." After Helly and Vivian finished speaking, she felt like she couldn't be any smarter. A domineering CEO's criteria for pursuing his wife was to be crazy, cool, and fucking awesome. Using his name to name something was not a big deal. Only love brand grilled fish. The little seventh prince scratched his bald head, and then raised his little face to look at the tea house opposite him. When an Ing relayed this name, his heartbeat was more than 10 times faster than before. Heh. What he didn't expect was that His Highness actually smiled. And he even looked very handsome when he smiled. Was it because the name given by the princess was too stupid so he smiled? Only loved you. Wei loved you very good, she has finally improved. Baligaju picked up the teacup in his hand and looked sideways at the slender figure outside the window. The curve at the corner of his mouth was gentler than ever. However, at this moment, the people who were just standing outside the Bayview Seafood Restaurant to watch the show suddenly had the urge to taste the dishes in the pot. Hellion Vivian didn't stay idle. While the fish was still roasting, she picked up the third knife. She pressed her left hand on the back of the lobster and made a small opening in the middle. Then she stuffed some chopped chicken meat into the opening and mixed it with shiitake mushrooms. After that, she smeared a thin layer of honey on the lobster and directly put it into the steamer basket to steam. Next, she took out the red cabbage from the pot and put it on a metal tray. Under the tray was a small charcoal stove with fruit wood. The fire was neither too big nor too small, it was just right. With this, the aroma just now became even more alluring. Some people couldn't wait to take a deep breath. I didn't expect Lord Wei to be so good at cooking. Just this aroma alone is enough to make people drool. Combining peanuts and chili together, it's amazing. I really want to have a bite. The last sentence was what everyone was thinking. Hellion Wei then brought 2 large crabs to the table. One was chopped into pieces and put into the pot with hot oil, while the other was steamed with scallions. The 2 fragrances intertwined together and continuously rushed into everyone's nose, stimulating everyone's taste buds. It smells so good. Even the 2 merchants who had been traveling around for many years couldn't help but ask curiously, what did Lord Wei add to it? Smells so good. Wild pepper. Hellion Vivian knew that until now no one in the War Dragon Empire had used wild pepper to enhance the aroma, so she took out a star anise wild pepper and showed it to the 2 people. The 2 people had seen this kind of wild pepper before, but they had never taken it seriously. That was because the smell was too strong, so they thought it was nothing good. They didn't expect that it would smell so good after being mixed with meat. It was really amazing. The hot aroma rushed out. Hellion Vivian knew that the steamed lobsters were almost done. She used 2 bamboo chopsticks and scooped up the whole lobster. Then she poured the sauce on top of the lobster and opened a bottle of wine she brewed herself. After pouring half a cup of wine into it, she closed the lid of the pot. Next was the steamed crab. It was very big. Ordinary steaming didn't seem to have any tricks, but at the beginning she used the right amount of cooking wine and salt to get rid of the fishy smell, leaving only the freshness of the crab. It was paired with a stack of seafood soy sauce and a small stack of cold fungus. Little 7, leave half a portion. Let the villagers enjoy the rest. Hellion Vivian passed the big plate to the little one. The little one nodded very seriously. Then he opened his mouth and picked up a crab leg. He pushed it in front of the old man and didn't say anything. He just looked up at the old man with his little face. It was impossible for anyone to refuse. The old man took the bamboo chopsticks and added a mouthful of crab meat. The fragrance left in his mouth made him open his eyes wide in an instant. Then he ate a second mouthful. Hey old man, you don't eat by yourself. Hurry up and tell us, what is that taste? It's delicious. Especially this sauce, I have never eaten it before. It's too delicious. Old man Yu's words made the commoners even more curious. What would Lord Wei's next dish be? Because it was obvious that they couldn't touch the steamed crab anymore. Chapter 526. Whoosh. Following that, Hellion Vivian opened the lid of the pot that contained the lobsters. At this time, the red wine had already been mixed with soy sauce and honey, and it had been simmered into a very beautiful soup. The golden lobster was lying on top of the soup and it was very tasty. Other than the intoxicating aroma, no one could smell anything else. In addition, they had never seen such a cooking method before, so they were even more curious about what it would taste like. As usual, Hellion Vivian kept half of the soup and gave the other half to the commoners. Baligaju narrowed his eyes and played with the porcelain cup in his hand. His voice was still as elegant as jade. Stop the next dish. Don't let me see her cooking for others. Yes. Shadow lowered his eyes and thought to himself, His Highness is becoming more and more possessive. I really don't know if this is a good thing or a bad thing. Outside the window, the commoners had already obtained one of the lobsters. They cut it open from the back and the fragrant smell of fresh lobsters instantly filled the air. In addition, there were shiitake mushrooms wrapped in it, which made the smell even more layered. Almost impatiently, someone picked up a piece of lobster meat and put it into his mouth. The fragrance spread through his teeth. The shiitake mushrooms and chicken were very fresh, and when paired with the lobster meat and vegetable juice, it was simply too delicious. I have never eaten lobster like this before. My tongue is about to melt. What did Lord Wei put in the lobster just now? I don't know, I have no clue at all. Master Lu, you are a chef, please try again. What did you put in the lobster? How can it be so delicious? The master surnamed Lu was an experienced chef and he was also a master at cooking seafood, but he had never eaten anything like this before. After all, what they valued the most was the sauce that was dipped in the lobster. To them, if they steamed the lobster until it was tender and delicious, and then mixed the sauce well, they could be considered a good chef who cooked seafood. And Lord Wei's method had clearly overturned his understanding of how to cook seafood. When he tasted the lobster meat, there was actually a sweet aftertaste. Did he put sugar in this? No, that's not right. Sugar can't have this effect because if I didn't taste it carefully, I wouldn't be able to taste the slight sweetness. This is a bit like honey. That's right. Honey. Master Lu shook his head and said with admiration, I didn't expect Lord Wei to put honey in the seasoning. What else is there besides honey? People were curious. After eating the prawn meat, they all wanted to go home and make a plate. Master Lu tilted his head and pondered, there is indeed another smell in here, but even an old man like me can't guess what it is. The fragrance is too mysterious. Look over there. Lord Wei is going to remove the grilled fish. Hearing this, all the citizens turned to look at Helly and Vivian. In the beginning, they thought that grilled fish was not something that could be considered elegant. However, when Helly and Vivian placed the entire fish on the iron plate that was previously handcuffed, she poured in the side dishes mixed with chili oil. Then she casually sprinkled peanuts and chopped green onions on the plate. It was a beautiful sight to behold. The sea fish had already been roasted to the point of dripping with oil. When it was placed on the iron plate, it would make a sizzling sound. The aroma was fully evaporated at that moment. The fish was crispy on the outside and tender on the inside. There was no need to eat it. Just by looking at the color on the outside, one could tell that the taste was about right. Because it was really too fragrant. If the previous two dishes were said to make people drool, then this one was said to be very fragrant. Then this fragrance was enough to make people salivate. The citizens licked their lips and waited for the first taste. However, they were stopped by a man in black. Helly and Vivian raised her eyebrows. Aning? Aning lowered his voice. Princess, His Highness is in the tea house opposite. He ordered this subordinate to stop your dish and let him eat it alone. After hearing In Ying's words, Helly and Vivian smiled. Sure enough, the novel was right. As long as you used his name, he would throw himself into your arms. Since His Highness wants to eat it, you can bring it to him. Helly and Vivian smiled faintly. Anyway, this side was almost done. If all the surprises were used up, it would lose the sense of mystery. The more you want to eat something, the more you want to eat it if you don't get to eat it. From a business point of view, it was best to stop now. When the citizens saw that the sea fish was not going to be tasted, they were disappointed. Helly and Vivian wiped her hands with a white handkerchief and changed the topic. Those who didn't get to eat it don't feel sorry. From today onwards, this dish will appear on the menu of Bayview Restaurant. When the merchants heard this, they became interested. This smell is really unforgettable. Lord Wei, when will we be able to eat it again? Don't tell me that what we see is different from what we eat. When this question was asked, the people who were eating excitedly calmed down a little. The atmosphere was more or less stagnant. Helly and Vivian's expression did not change at all. She was still smiling faintly and slowly answered, Don't worry about this. In the past, the ingredients used in Bayview Restaurant were not fresh or were used to deceive everyone. In the future, the chef of Bayview Restaurant will be standing at the entrance so that the merchants can see the chef using the ingredients on the spot. After hearing this, the two merchants standing behind Helly and Vivian looked at each other. Their eyes were filled with admiration for Helly and Vivian. Placing the kitchen stove at the entrance and making the food transparent. This alone was the first in the country. It was definitely a hot topic and a selling point. Not only could it wash away the bad reputation of Bayview Restaurant, but it could also attract people from all over the country. In addition, the location of Bayview Restaurant could be seen as soon as one entered the provincial capital. Placing the kitchen stove at the entrance had a very good publicity effect. When it was time to eat, the aroma would be enticing. It would be difficult for them not to make money. They finally understood why Profound Heavens could become so famous in just a month. Other than the fact that the martial arts there were indeed good, the more important reason was that its boss was too good at creating hype. Every step she took was unexpected and pleasantly surprising. It was obvious that Helian Wei Wei's words had moved the merchants. Initially, they came to the provincial capital to try the seafood from Bayview Seafood Restaurant. If the seafood was good, they would bring some back to their hometown. However, they had been here for quite some time now, and all they heard was that Bayview Seafood Restaurant was scamming them. They would often replace the lobsters they were looking for with small shrimps. The difference was so huge that they were basically bullying foreigners like them. Now they did not have to worry about this problem anymore. They could get whatever they wanted on the spot and they could rest assured. However, but how about the price? Someone mustered up the courage and asked, "Is it going to be a scamming price again?" Chapter 527. Helian Vivian turned around and looked at her. "Auntie, how much do you think the lobster that I just cooked costs?" "About 5 taels of silver per lobster." The auntie was a little scared after asking, so her voice became weaker. Helian Vivian smiled faintly and said, "My fellow villagers are all seasoned fishermen, so they are more familiar with the price of seafood in the provincial capital than me. I won't lie to my fellow villagers. In the future, every dish in Bayview Restaurant will cost 3 times more than the purchase price." 3 times? Isn't that 12 or 13 taels of silver? The auntie calculated. Although she still felt that it was expensive, it was much less compared to the sky-high price of Bayview Restaurant in the past. In the past, it would be unreasonable for Bayview Restaurant to not extort more than 100 taels of silver for such a big fish. Lord Wei's price is reasonable. The old chef with the surname Liu opened his mouth again. In the restaurant business, the price is usually this much more than the purchase price. Some of them are even more expensive. Lord Wei's price is already considered cheap. Moreover, the taste of the lobster just now is something that even the best chefs in the capital can't cook. I don't dare to say anything about the reopening of Bayview Restaurant, but this dish is really worth it. That's right. I agree with Master Liu. Auntie Zhang, you are too stingy. Isn't it normal to sell a lobster for 13 taels of silver? Don't tell me that you want Liao to pay you another 100 taels of silver? You should be honest. The auntie shifted her gaze and said, "I didn't say much. I just wanted to know. Moreover, it is 3 times more than the purchase price." Helian Vivian looked at the auntie indifferently. She knew that there were many kinds of people. In the countryside, most of them bullied the weak and feared the strong. She was not a saint. She would not treat the other party differently because of their status. "Auntie, you don't have to come if you don't think it is worth it." Helian Vivian's tone was very indifferent. However, the auntie's expression suddenly changed. She did not say that she did not want to eat. Didn't she say that Lord Wei was kind and considerate? Why didn't he follow her instructions and lower the price? "The price won't change. I have my own rules." Helian Vivian looked straight at the crowd and said, "In the future, when this Bayview Seafood Restaurant grows bigger, the dishes will be more complete. I welcome all of you to eat here and I won't force you if you don't come." Hearing this, the merchants laughed. That's how business should be. The rules can't be changed. We can rest assured now that Bayview Seafood Restaurant is in Sir Wei's hands. In the future, we hope that Sir Wei will take care of our business. Let's take care of each other. Helian Vivian still had a faint smile on her face. She was polite from beginning to end. The merchants began to admire this young Lord Wei more and more. Not only did he become a magistrate at such a young age, he even defeated the local tyrant. Now that he had reopened Bayview Seafood Restaurant, his magnanimity was truly admirable. At that moment they decided to immediately start selling 100 crabs. They wanted the ones that smelled like Bayview Seafood Restaurant. Helian Vivian tilted her head and instructed, "Steward Zhu, bring this gentleman to register. There will be many things to work with in the future." Yes. The 2 merchants who followed Helian Vivian earlier were excited. 100 crabs were sold on the first day of the restaurant's opening. Only the boss of Profound Heavens could do such a thing. It was no wonder that people said that if one had such a good boss, one would be able to live a prosperous life. The commoners could only watch as the businessmen entered the Bayview seafood restaurant. They could not sell any of the seafood they had. It was an indescribable feeling in their hearts. At this moment, Hellion Vivian spoke again. This time when Bayview Seafood Restaurant reopens, 4 more ponds will be built outside the restaurant. They will be used to purchase the seafood caught by the common people. When the common people heard this news, they were overjoyed. Sirway, look at my crab. I just caught it today. It's still moving. Sirway, there's mine too. How much is this seafood worth? Just give me whatever you want. The crowd scrambled to squeeze over. Their enthusiasm had reached its peak. Hellion Vivian smiled faintly. Don't worry, everyone. Stand in a line and take your time. The steward will arrange the purchase. As long as the seafood provided by the common people is good enough and big enough, we will be able to get a good price. When Auntie Zhang, who was nitpicking just now, heard this, she pushed the people around her aside with brute force. She did not care if the person she pushed was an old man. She leaned in front of Hellion Vivian and said, Sirway, please accept mine first. I have a lot of seafood. They are big and cheap. If you don't believe me, I can take them out for you to see. Hellion Vivian glanced at her slowly and said, Go to the back and line up. That one glance was enough to make the woman freeze on the spot. That was because there was no warmth in that gaze. If anyone doesn't line up in the future, don't ever buy their seafood, Hellion Vivian said to the steward. The steward also glanced at Auntie Zhang and bowed his head respectfully. Yes. Auntie Zhang was used to being unreasonable. Now that she was scolded by Hellion Vivian in front of the crowd, she could only feel her face turning red. She wanted to find a hole to hide in. This time she finally calmed down. With her tail between her legs, she started to line up in an orderly manner. Bayview Seafood Restaurant reopened this time. Firstly, there was no firecrackers, and secondly, there was no lottery. However, it was much more grand than before. Everyone knew about it. Once they bought the seafood, they would be able to sell it immediately. Even the people in the capital did not hesitate to send people to look for a wonderful dish called drunken lobster in red wine after hearing about it. Not to mention the dishes like spicy diagonal crab and stir-fried scallops. They were even famous in the provincial capital. Slowly it started to spread to the whole country. All of this happened in just 3 days. In just 3 days, Bayview Seafood Restaurant changed from a restaurant that was famous for its scams to the #1 seafood restaurant, where customers had to line up for their meals. It stirred up a storm in the world. People could not help but be curious. Who was this Lord Wei? How could he have such means? They all ran to the provincial capital's yamen to see Lord Wei's face. However, by the time they arrived, the provincial capital yamen had already been replaced with a new magistrate. The legendary Lord Wei seemed to have disappeared into thin air. Only the existence of the Bayview Seafood Restaurant could prove that this person had indeed been to the provincial capital. Your Highness, Princess, if we continue forward, we will enter the hinterland of the capital. It's not convenient for me to bring my soldiers there. Jiang Liun sat on the back of the horse and cupped his hands toward Beligaju and Hellion Vivian. I've escorted your Highness and Princess here. The retired emperor said that the line in the provincial capital has been removed. The people in the capital will be anxious. Your Highness and Princess, please be careful along the way. Chapter 528. Hellion Vivian nodded, indicating that she understood. Her and Beligage's actions would probably affect a lot of benefits. It was normal for the remaining elders to not be able to sit still. However, she did not know what kind of tricks they would play. At night in the bamboo forest, a man in a long robe stood against the light, holding an ancient scroll in his fair hand. Master. The black shadow landed and knelt down on one knee. We have found Hellion Vivian's whereabouts. She is indeed not in the palace, but has just entered the capital city. As for her whereabouts, I am still investigating. The man looked back and coughed softly. His voice was as clear as a jade plate. There is no need for that. If she has just entered the capital city, then it is very likely. What is very likely? The black shadow did not understand at all. The man continued, in less than 10 days from Fuping County to the provincial capital, all the forces in the west of the capital city have been uprooted by someone with the surname Wei. Coincidentally, she has just returned from outside. Oh, what a good move. Master, Are you saying that the person with the surname Wei is Hellion Vivian? The Black Shadow was anxious. Does that mean that the thing we buried in the palace is useless? The man withdrew his gaze and said calmly, it is not useless. Didn't the South study room cause quite a stir? Soon even the person in the palace will become one of our people. Crack. The incense in the stove burned out. The main hall of the palace was still as magnificent as ever. The carved pillars, fine silk curtains and layers of golden silkworm silk shrouded the world behind, making it look like a fairyland. Outside the imperial palace, the water in the imperial river was slowly undergoing a tremendous change. A trace of red blood rose from the bottom of the water. There was a branch of the imperial river hidden in the flowers, and the trickling water was supposed to be so clear. Unbeknownst to others, some blood flowed out. The source could not be found. Thick blood flowed out from the beginning of the river, dyeing the clear water red. The smell of the blood was fresh as if it was floating in the air like a sweet song. Crack. The wheels ran over the wood. When Hellion Vivian woke up from her nightmare, the carriage had already entered the capital city. Bailey Jiaju sat beside her and reached out his hand to hold her face. He wiped the sweat on her forehead with his fingertips. His long eyebrows were slightly furrowed and his tone was very indifferent. Are you still unwilling to tell me what you dreamed of? I really don't remember this time. Hellion Vivian was telling the truth. She had no recollection of it, only a vague feeling. As soon as she arrived at the capital city, the nightmare. Should she check if the capital city's feng shui was suitable for her? You don't have to look. The feng shui in Beijing is very good. It's just that the qi here isn't quite right. Yuan Ming didn't expect that in just 10 days after they left the capital, the qi here would become like this. When they were in school, they were the effects of the capital's a city. If the peaceful feng shui was destroyed, then there was a high possibility that demons would take advantage of the situation to invade. That shouldn't be the case. There are so many people in the capital city. The yang qi should be flourishing. How could it become so muddy? Yuan Ming was still talking to himself, which was unusual. Hellion Vivian narrowed her eyes. It seemed that the capital city's weather was about to change. Boom. Thunder rumbled. The autumn rain in the north came down very quickly. After it was over, it was a little cold. The rain washed everything away. At the very least, nothing could be seen in the imperial palace. The imperial father was called to the front of the palace. He had to be present to punish Elder Hellion. The retired emperor knew this better than anyone else. Hellion Vivian did not go with Beligaju. Instead, she took off her cloth clothes and changed back to her usual clothes. She stood in front of the Defense Division's residence with only the little 7th Prince by her side. However, the little 7th Prince alone was enough to fight against more than 100 guards. Third sister-in-law, are we eating here today? The little 7th Prince was still carrying the local specialty he brought back from the provincial capital. A big crab. Along the way, the crab stretched out its pincers. If an ordinary person saw it, they would definitely bite someone. The little 7th Prince lowered his head and gave the crab a bite. The crab was immediately scared by the bite. A person who scared the crab with a bite. The shadows raised their heads and looked at the sky silently for a while. In this world, only their little master could do that. With such a miraculous ability, he could indeed accompany the Princess Consort in alone. If there was no other way, he could give a bite to each of the stewards. Hellion Vivian held the little one's hand and walked into the residence. With every step she took, the image of her being chased out of this place became clearer. And now, she was finally back. Hellion Vivian took a deep breath and clenched her fists that were hidden under her long sleeves. She walked up the stairs with her long legs. Behind her was the setting sun. The combination of light and shadow created an indescribably beautiful scene. What was meant to come had finally come. There were a total of 49 stewards in the Hellion family and 41 of them came. They came to propose the removal of the successor. When they looked at Hellion Vivian, there was a bit of disdain. The royal family always did things flawlessly, so even until now, the stewards in the Hellion family did not know that the Lord Wake that they often heard these days was Hellion Vivian. They thought that Hellion Vivian was just a poor princess consort in name. That was why they all sat here and asked Hellion Vivian to give up her seat. Those without merit did not have the qualifications to be the true successor of the Hellion family. This was what the Hellion old man said when he was alive, and it was also one of the rules of the Hellion family. As long as more than 40 stewards jointly wrote a letter, It would be effective. Someone knocked the pipe in his hand on the table and said, "Eldest young miss, you really made us wait for a long time. Ah, Brother Gua, since eldest young miss is here, let's not talk nonsense. Let's quickly tell eldest young miss our intentions and let her voluntarily give up her seat so that both sides can see each other. Brother Li is right. Eldest young miss, you should understand the rules of the family. Although you are now the princess consort of the imperial family, the rules cannot be broken. This subordinate advises eldest young miss to hand over her authority properly, so that everyone will not be embarrassed." Helian Wei Wei didn't say anything at first. Instead she walked to the main seat and crossed her slender legs. Her left hand, which was clasped with a silver ring, lazily supported her chin. She was overflowing with mischief. "What did you guys just say? Give up my seat?" Chapter 529. This is also a foolproof plan that we came up with. After all, we can't put our lives in the hands of a clan leader without any achievements. Don't you think so, everyone? The person holding the pipe stood up and turned around to look at the stewards. Immediately there was a response. "Manager Yu is right. There are more than 100 females in the Helian clan, not to mention there are also males in the periphery. If there isn't a person who can shoulder the burden as the clan leader, who will be able to protect the Helian clan when there is trouble in the future?" Helian Vivian listened to the people below as she played with the jade pendant on her waist. Her voice was calm. "Little Seven, throw Steward Yu out." Little Seven, who was nibbling on a crab, looked up and responded, "Yes." Her small body flew out. Without even looking, she raised her hand and threw Steward Yu behind her. It was no different from throwing trash. Only a bang was heard. The pipe rolled on the ground. Steward Yu was thrown out of the door and heavily hit the door frame. Boo! Blood fell to the ground. The stewards didn't have time to stop her. They stood up angrily. "Eldest young miss, are you trying to break the rules of the clan by doing this?" Steward Yu only said a few words and eldest young miss dealt such a heavy hand. "You're really too much. It's a well-known fact that you don't have any achievements. Don't tell me that no one is allowed to say it." The stewards looked at each other. They couldn't wait for Helian Vivian to get angry. As long as she got angry, they would have an excuse to remove her from her position. Although Elder Yun was no longer around, the other 3 elders had already sent people over to remind them that the rules of etiquette of the major clans could not be broken. If it was broken, they would naturally find the emperor to reason with. Therefore, with the support of the 3 elders, what were they afraid of? If they didn't pull Helian Vivian down, they would be the unlucky ones in the future. They must get rid of her before she fully rises. Helian Vivian looked up and looked at the stewards who were speaking one after another. The corner of her mouth slightly curved. "Who said that I don't have any achievements?" Hearing this rhetorical question, all the stewards were stunned and the people who were talking were also speechless. The air in the hall seemed to freeze all of a sudden. Everyone slowly turned to look at Helian Vivian. "De Xiong, recite the imperial edict that the retired emperor gave the stewards as soon as I returned to the capital." In contrast to the stewards' restlessness, Helian Vivian sat leisurely on the wooden chair from beginning to end. She played with the jade pendant on her waist with a faint smile on her face, as if she was in control of the entire situation. "Yes." De Xiong stretched out his left hand, revealing a golden imperial edict. "Helian Vivian, by my order, personally went to Fuping and changed her name to Wei Wei. She eradicated the corrupt officials and solved the drought with wisdom. She has made countless contributions. In the future, she will be rewarded with merits and can enjoy the treatment of a first-rank official." What? Wei 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 Wei. The stewards took a step back dispiritedly and fell back into their wooden chairs. Many people's expressions began to change drastically, and the teacups in their hands began to tremble. How could she be that Wei Wei? In other words, Elder Yun was originally eliminated by her. The stewards' hearts trembled and their eyes shook violently. Since when did this little girl, whom they had always looked down upon, first open a world-renowned trading company, then invite back the hidden army, and now, even Elder Yun was dragged down by her? What was she trying to do? What was she trying to do? Helian Vivian stood up with a smile. "It seems that all the stewards have heard it clearly. It's time for me to speak, Steward Li. I am here." Steward Li trembled as he knelt down. Helian Vivian walked over. My grandfather treated you well when he was alive, but you were the first to support Hellion Guangyao when he came out to seize power. Steward Li could no longer speak clearly. Hellion Vivian did not intend to listen to what he had to say. Her long sleeves fluttered in the wind. Men drag him down. Doesn't he like to show off his power and money? Let Steward Li have a taste of what it feels like to be smashed to death by money. Yes. De Xiong lowered his eyes and accepted the order. Hellion Vivian wiped her hands. Bring Steward Yu along as well. These two are jackals of the same tribe. Yes. Out of the 8 stewards, 2 were sentenced to death in an instant. The remaining 33 stewards who followed the trend scrambled to their knees. Eldest Miss, please spare our lives. I'm afraid of dirtying my hands by killing all of you. Hellion Vivian glanced at them indifferently. All of you have not done anything excessive to my grandfather. You're just a bunch of cowards. I don't want to take your lives. From now on, hand over all of your assets and properties and get out of the capital. Don't let me see you again. This time I don't want your lives, but it doesn't mean that I won't kill you if I see you again. Get out. The 33 stewards looked at each other. In terms of martial arts, Eldest Miss already had the Hidden Army. Although they had never seen the Hidden Army in action, they knew how powerful the Hidden Army was in the past. It was definitely not an exaggeration to scare them. In terms of martial arts, they had already lost. In terms of literature, just the name Wei Wei showed that they had already lost. Thinking of this, they did not dare to hesitate and immediately got out of the general's residence. Hellion Vivian looked at the remaining 6 stewards who were trembling in fear and smiled. Back then, all of you betrayed my grandfather and joined Elder Yun's side, helping Hellion Guangyao to rise to power. Now that you see my current appearance, are you thinking about how I should deal with all of you? Eldest Miss, you can't, slap. Hellion Vivian slapped him, her eyes cold. What can't I do? Since I can touch the Empress, touch Prime Minister Su, remove Hellion Guangyao and push Elder Yun into prison, I can naturally do the same to all of you. De Xiong, take all of them away. The Hellion clan does not need stewards who forget righteousness at the sight of profit. Eldest Miss. One of the stewards pulled on Hellion Vivian's trousers. I have something to say. Hellion Vivian looked at him condescendingly. You have something to say? What do you want to say? The Hellion clan has a lot of assets. Eldest Miss, if you kill all of us, there will be no one to manage the Hellion clan. How can we bring glory to the clan? Eldest Miss, do you really want to kill all of us just for your own selfish desires? Hellion Vivian reached out and grabbed him by the collar. Back then, when my mother was seriously ill in bed, didn't all of you pressure her step by step? Not only did you give Hellion Guangyao supreme power, you even helped the Su family to slander my mother and let her die in humiliation. Do you think that I, Hellion Vivian, can't handle the general's residence without all of you? Chapter 530. Do you really think that the stewards of Wei Zhe world are just decorations? I use them because I want them to replace your positions one day. Hellion Vivian slowly raised her eyes. Her eyes were like the stars in the sky, dazzling. It is said that the stewards of the family cannot be dismissed. After all, it is not easy to find people who are familiar with the industry. Steward son, do you think that the stewards who can manage profound heavens, who can open shops and collect materials from all over the place, are inferior to petty people like you who only know how to talk big? Replace our positions? Replace our positions? We have lost. After Steward's son laughed, he kept repeating the words, we have lost. When the other 5 stewards saw him like this, they also looked like they had lost their souls. Their eyes were half closed and their hair was messy. There was no longer the imposing appearance they had when they first arrived. From the Empress to the stewards, they fought steadily step by step. Many people thought that she opened Wei Zhe world for money. But in fact she was thinking about who would replace them in the future. She had really played a big game of chess. Such a game of chess, even if it was a talented minister in an important position, he might not be able to win. And she, a good-for-nothing young lady who had been ignored by them for a long time, with the power of one person, reversed the situation and stirred up the situation of this country. They had indeed lost. Dusk, sunset. In the entire defense general's residence, all the stewards were either removed or driven away. In just a short time they had been replaced by Hellion Vivian's people. She stood alone in the middle of the courtyard, dressed in white with long sleeves fluttering in the wind. Young master. De Xiong knelt down on one knee. Hellion Vivian smiled. 7 years, a whole 7 years. I didn't even have the qualifications to stand in the main courtyard before. Young master. De Xiong opened his mouth as if he wanted to say something. Hellion Vivian raised her eyes. Her eyebrows were like a painting. From now on, the Hellion clan. Things. Return. Original. Master. Yes. 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 3 kowtows sounded. First it was the stewards, then the guards, and finally the thousands of hidden soldiers led by Qi Yan. Ambushing troops filled the courtyard, only bowing down to Hellion Wei Wei. Such a scene reminded many old people of the time when old Master Hellion was still alive. There were discussions in the capital city, saying that the Hellion clan was really going to make a comeback this time. When Prime Minister Su heard the news, he vomited another mouthful of blood from his already severely ill body. Before night fell, he had received a message from Hellion Vivian. Prime Minister Su narrowed his eyes, his expression cold. "Oh, Prime Minister Su, do you not want to see me, or do you not dare to?" Hellion Vivian walked into the inner residence. The guards were all taken care of by the little 7th prince who followed behind her. Prime Minister Su looked at her and coughed a few times. He put on a fake smile and said, "Princess, what are you talking about? I've been ill for a long time. I don't attend the imperial court and I don't see any important guests. This is something that everyone knows. That's why I said that I don't want to see you." Lord Su is really magnanimous. Hellion Vivian smiled. "I know that Lord Su just defeated Hellion Guangyao yesterday and planned to take back the power of the Su family. However, you realize that even though Hellion Guangyao was defeated, it was hard to take back the power. Lord Su, do you want to know why?" When Prime Minister Su heard the name Hellion Guangyao, his hands that were clutching his sleeves trembled in anger. Hellion Wei Wei continued, "That's because the forces that Lord Su once sent out have long fallen into my hands. I don't think I need to teach Lord Su how to be a fisherman when the clam fights, right?" Prime Minister Su pressed his hand on his chest. Hellion Vivian tidied her robe casually. "Even the woman who got close to Hellion Guangyao and took away your daughter's love was sent by me. I wanted to let Prime Minister Su have a taste of what it feels like to have your family taken away by your son-in-law. You. Prime Minister Su bent over in pain. Hellion Wei Wei smiled faintly. "It's getting late, Prime Minister Su, you should rest well. With your current condition you won't be able to live much longer. I'm just curious, so I'm here to ask you, how does it feel to be slapped in the face?" Prime Minister Su couldn't hold it in anymore. His throat churned and he spat out mouthfuls of blood. Hellion Vivian wiped away the blood stains and smiled. "How could I forget that Lord Su can't get angry because of his illness?" Hellion Vivian. Prime Minister Su roared with the last of his strength. "Do you think that you can take revenge for your family if I die? Ah, how naive. A martial arts aristocratic family with accumulated military exploits, as well as one of the founding fathers of the nation. Do you think that by relying on me and the Empress you can topple old man Hellion? If you don't have great power, who can touch him? Even if you get the Hellion family, you may not be able to take revenge for them. They wanted old Master Hellion to die, and old Master Hera also died. Do you know why this happened? Even the Emperor wouldn't necessarily want your Hellion family to flourish that much." "Ah." Prime Minister Su laughed and coughed at the same time. His pale face was filled with pride. Hellion Vivian bent over and tilted her body. "Isn't it just 3 elders and an incapable ruler? I have my own ideas on how to deal with them. The most important thing is to see Prime Minister Su's family ruined and dead, lying here like a rotten egg. That's my purpose this time." Prime Minister Su spat out blood again. His eyes widened and he was completely out of breath. When Hellion Vivian came out of the Su residence, she heard the ringing of the funeral bell. And she was getting closer and closer to her goal. At night in the south study room deep in the palace. Under layers of curtains, the Emperor sat in the white smoke. He was becoming more and more obsessed with alchemy to achieve longevity. He had reached a certain point. The 3 elders sat opposite him and said in a deep voice, "Your Majesty, it's time to deal with this Hellion Vivian. Isn't she doing well?" The Emperor laughed and looked at the elixir in his hand crazily. "Why should I deal with her?" The 3 elders looked at him and said in a deep voice, "We shouldn't deal with her because of her recent behavior. We should deal with her because of the incident of body possession. We suspect that this Hellion Vivian has indeed been possessed. Not only is her behavior not like before, but the water pump she made in Fooping is also unheard of. Such a person must have been possessed. Your Majesty, do you still remember the horror of body possession? A priest once said that once a body possession person appears, it means that the devil is on the rampage. At that time Your Majesty's throne might be threatened. Chapter 531. Moreover, one of the elders paused and looked at the Emperor's side profile. She's also the royal consort. The Emperor's hand that was holding the spiritual pill paused and then slowly tightened. Are you sure that Hellion Vivian was possessed? 80%. Elder Feng smiled. As for whether it's true or not, we'll know once we try. The Emperor lowered his eyes and took a sip of tea. After a while he asked, how do we try? On the day of the royal wedding, 18 eminent monks of the Hidden Spirit Temple chanted the incantation together. If it wasn't for the appearance of the fire Qilin, Hellion Vivian might have been exposed. Elder Feng lowered his voice. Why don't we try again, Your Majesty? The Emperor glanced at him without any expression on his face. 18 eminent monks entered the capital at the same time. Do you think you can hide it from the third prince? You don't have to worry about this, Your Majesty. We've already thought of an excuse and it's perfectly justified. Elder Feng's voice was deep. There haven't been many in the palace recently. According to the subordinates, there are always palace maids who mysteriously disappear, and even their corpses can't be found. We can use this as an excuse to invite the eminent monks into the palace, saying that they're here to resolve their grievances. This way the royal family won't suspect anything. The retired emperor has already started to write the rules, so they'll definitely investigate. Since that's the case, why don't we let our people investigate? Don't you think so, Your Majesty? The emperor turned the spiritual pill in his hand. You're saying that the retired emperor has already sent people to investigate the palace maids? How come I don't know about this? There's still no news. Elder Feng moved closer. The retired emperor has always done things quietly. If I didn't get some information from the side, I wouldn't have realized that the retired emperor has the intention to manage the palace again. He probably wants the royal family to get the hang of it as soon as possible. This time the royal family disguised themselves and went to the provincial capital. It can be said that they've won over many people and planted many of their own people in the 6 ministries. If this continues, I'm really worried that Your Majesty won't be able to control the situation in the future. When the emperor heard this, he looked at the flickering candlelight and narrowed his eyes. Let's do as the 3 elders say and try. Yes. The 3 of them looked at each other and saw the smiles on each other's faces that indicated that they had succeeded in their scheme. The night deepened. After leaving the imperial palace, the elders boarded their respective carriages. No one noticed that there was a black dot behind the neck of one of the elders. It was a black spot that only possessed people would have. Under the moonlight, there were actually 2 shadows swaying under one person's feet. It was indescribably terrifying. Master, our plan is going well. Is she going to wake up soon? The little one carried a huge gourd on his back and looked up at the white-robed man. The man leaned over and stroked its head. If you want her to wake up, this is not enough. Then what else do you need? The little one blinked. The man smiled as gentle as the wind. Demons walk freely. Tick-tock. The rain beat against the window. Hellion Vivian absent-mindedly looked at herself walking in the palace. It was a place she had never been before. There was a very deep river and the bottom of the river could not be seen. There was an indescribable smell. That smell she was very familiar with. There was a smell of rust and the salty sweetness floating in the air, making people feel very uncomfortable. Hellion Vivian did not know how she came here. She wanted to call Yuan Ming out, but she found that she could not activate the fantasy space. There was no sign of Shao Qi or anyone else. Except the Hellion Vivian that she dreamed of before. She looked at her from the riverside with tears in her eyes. In an instant she was in front of her. Her face was as pale as a sheet of paper. Why won't you return my body to me? Why? Hellion Vivian did not move. She let her shout as her eyes were clear. The Hellion Vivian did not expect her to be so calm. Her eyes narrowed little by little, and then she wrapped her arms and legs around Hellion Vivian's body. You can't escape. You can deal with anyone, but you can never deal with me. Because this body is mine and it can only be mine. The hands that wrapped around her were like unknown tentacles. No matter how hard she tried, she could not get rid of them. Gradually, Hellion Vivian felt something spread to her waist. When she looked again, she did not know when, but she was standing in the river. The river water was dark red, and a white hand was pulling her hand, trying to pull her into the river. Third sister-in-law, third sister-in-law. Hellion Wei Wei opened her eyes abruptly. The first thing she saw was little Seven's fierce little face. He was lying on the bed, looking at her worriedly with a pair of tiger-like eyes. Behind him stood Beligaju, who was cold. He must have just returned from outside. He did not have time to take off his fur coat, and his body was still wet. He reached out and brushed the wet hair on her forehead. His eyes darkened slightly. What did you dream of? Nothing. Hellion Vivian reached out and put her arms around his thin waist. She buried her face in his calming chest. I'm still sleepy. Let's go back to sleep. Beligaju pulled her away and looked at her with his deep eyes. Then he said to the little one standing beside him, Shao-Chi, go back to sleep. I want to sleep with third brother and third sister-in-law. The little one said fiercely, I don't want to sleep on the bed. This bed is too soft. I'll sleep on the floor. Third brother, don't step on my stomach when you get up. Beligaju glanced at him. Do you want to take off your pants and dance again? No. The little one jumped up at once. With a calm face he said, I'm going back to sleep now. I just came back to the palace recently. I'm very busy there. Third brother, you'd better not look for me all the time. That's all. After saying that, the little one slipped away at lightning speed. Hellion Vivian found it funny. Beligaju reached out and lifted her chin. Is there someone who wants to take over your body? Hellion Vivian was stunned. She instinctively wanted to call Yuan Ming out. Yuan Ming shrugged. Your man is very smart and unfathomable. I don't know how he can guess correctly. But it's strange. If he's here, the other party won't be so arrogant when you have nightmares. Like today, I can't even get into your dream. It's very dangerous. As soon as he came in, the river receded. Don't you think it's strange? I'm just wondering how he knows. Hellion Vivian glared at Yuan Ming. She got out of the fantasy space and looked into Beligaju's eyes. She told him the truth. In the dream, you didn't succeed in taking over my body. Beligaju picked her up and put her in his arms. He rested his chin on her hair as if he was thinking about something. Chapter 532. Hellion Vivian stretched her arms and legs and said absent-mindedly, I think it's quite successful. This body seems to be mine. It looks exactly the same as when I was in modern times. Beligaju's hand on her waist tightened, but he didn't say anything. Hellion Vivian looked at him and lowered her eyes slightly. Do you know the old Hellion Vivian? Yes. Beligaju's fingers tangled in her hair and his voice was as noble as usual. What's wrong? Hellion Vivian shook her head. Nothing, it's just that. She actually wanted to ask how he felt about the old Hellion Vivian. In her dream, when she was young, Hellion Vivian seemed to have sent him a few pieces of pastries. At that time, Beligaju was still a cold and unfavored little prince. Hellion Vivian was the most favored granddaughter of old Master Hellion. She often went in and out of the palace and was very popular with people of the same age. Even Beligaju seemed to treat her differently. Hellion Vivian looked up and smiled. You seem to be very concerned about my body. Shouldn't I care? Bailey Jiaju took the cloak and wrapped it around her body. Then he pulled her into his arms. Hellion Vivian thought for a moment and said, You should be concerned. What? Do you think I'm too strict with you? Beligaju pinched her wrist and smiled. Your claws have been a lot quieter recently. Hellion Vivian looked at him with a smile. I'm a domineering president. I'm the loyal dog type. I won't scratch people casually. Why do I feel like I can't raise you properly? Beligaju hugged her and said in a deep voice, No one can take you away from me, including yourself. Do you understand? Hellion Vivian was stunned. She looked up at the sky. I didn't say I was going to run away. Didn't I let you lock me up? Speaking of which, shouldn't you change that lock of yours? It's all the same design. It's not challenging at all. You think those locks are for you to play with? Beligaju kissed the tip of her ear. However, it is indeed time to change. You like it made of gold. Hellion Vivian looked at him seriously. Actually, you don't have to go through so much trouble to please me. I like it better if you exchange the lock for banknotes. With this kind of taste, how did you become a princess? Baligaju gave a long sigh, but it was not hard to see the smile on his face. Hellion Wei Wei leaned on him leisurely. You were the one who chose it. It's not too late to ask for a refund. Return it. Baligaju looked at her expression. His long and narrow eyes deepened. In the end he just took her hand and played with it in his hand. Seemed like he liked it a lot. Sometimes this king thinks you are very smart. Sometimes I want to see if your head is filled with cotton balls or not. From the beginning I gave you all the financial expenses. Did you forget? Hellion Vivian. She really forgot about this matter. When Bailey Jiaju saw her expression he knew that she didn't remember it. The corners of his mouth curled up, then he stood up and said, So, you can take as much as you want in banknotes as you want. Why do you have to ask me? She couldn't say that she was used to taking advantage of others. Hellion Vivian seemed to have thought of something. Her eyebrows raised. Then wouldn't your food and clothes be in my hands in the future? Yes. Baligaju's voice was indifferent. He reached out and pulled open his collar. Hellion Vivian smiled. Very good. In the future, if this king was not obedient, she would learn from him and make him eat only vegetables and not meat. Do you need this king to remind you? Even if this king doesn't have money, there is still meat to eat. Baligaju threw his outer robe to the side and looked at her playfully. I am still the one in charge here. What we eat today and what we eat tomorrow. The imperial kitchen also listens to this king. The money is in your hands but you are still in my hands. Come here. Hellion Vivian ignored him. But he picked her up. One of his hands was by her side, and the other hand was undoing her robe. His slender fingers were slightly cold. Do you want to be on top or bottom today? Neither. Hellion Vivian buried her face in his inner robe. I want to sleep. My eyes hurt. Baligaju stopped and frowned. What's wrong with your eyes? Sleepy. Hellion Vivian was also looking for an excuse. Bailey Jiaju did not let her sleep. Instead he pulled her into his arms. With one hand he took a bottle of Tianshan Snow Lotus powder from beside the bed. With the other hand he gently lifted her face and sprinkled the powder on her eyelids. Hellion Vivian smelled it and knew that it was Tianshan Snow Lotus. It faintly merged with the man's scent. So rich. Even the eye drops are from Tianshan Snow Lotus. Sure enough, he was not just a little rich. He spent a lot of effort on this body. Baligaju looked at her with a faint smile. What are you muttering about again? I'm not muttering anything. I'm just wondering if your family knows that you're so rich. Hellion Vivian yawned casually. Thinking about that dream, her eyebrows wrinkled. Baligaju curved his thin lips and said slowly, Of course they know. My money is all managed by my wife. Don't you know this the best? Hellion Vivian was not very comfortable because of that dream and wanted to vent her anger on a certain highness, who knew that she couldn't win against him and couldn't get anything out of him. She just closed her eyes and rubbed the pillow from time to time with a light face. Baligaju pulled her back and patted her back with his left hand. His voice was low and pleasant. Are you angry that I have more money than you? After all, she said that she wanted to become the richest person in the entire Dragon War Empire. Although there were very few people who took this as their life goal, it was obvious that this little thing belonged to a very small part of them. What do you mean yours? That's mine. Hellion Vivian became spirited. What's yours is mine, do you understand? Baligaju put one hand behind his head and smiled charmingly. I understand, great patron. Not bad, very good. Hellion Vivian was very satisfied and the smile on her face became even wider. Baligaju raised his eyebrows. Then what about yours? Of course it's still mine. Hellion Vivian narrowed her eyes and put her head on his chest. Baligaju laughed in a low voice. You still say that you won't scratch people. That's just the logic of a bandit. Then why aren't you returning the goods? Hellion Vivian's voice faded. The last syllable was hidden at the bottom so low that it was a bit vague. Bailey Jiaju's pair of extremely deep phoenix eyes heavily narrowed for a moment, as if all of his hostility was rolling out. Even his voice was full of danger. Don't let me hear the two words return the goods again or else. Chapter 533. Otherwise you'll break my legs. You've said this more than 10 times already. Hellion Wei Wei indifferently closed her eyes. Her hand was still on Bailey Jiaju's waist. She had a fearless expression. If you have the ability, then beat me to death. Baligaju smiled. Who said that I'm going to break your legs? What else can I do? Hellion Vivian yawned. Beligaju lowered his head and leaned over. His thin lips fell behind her ear. I want you to be unable to get out of bed. Unable to get out of bed? Hellion Vivian stopped yawning. She didn't even look at that godlike handsome face. She turned around and wanted to escape. However, she found that she couldn't escape at all. He was the one hugging him. Who asked his body to smell so good? Her actions were all subconscious. Now he only needed to reach out a hand and press on her back. Then she wouldn't be able to move at all. I think it's better if we fight. Hellion Vivian moved. Her eyes flickered and she began to change the topic. Think about it. We're both top experts in the capital, right? Don't you think it's a pity that we haven't fought yet? Beligaju glanced at her. Experts? Hellion Vivian. What kind of look is that? Originally, Hellion Vivian didn't really want to fight. Now that he was looking at her like this, she had to fight. I can fight with you. Beligaju's thin lips fell on her lips. If I win, you can take the initiative tonight. Hellion Vivian didn't want to agree at first. However, her eyes lit up and she agreed very quickly. Okay, but if I win, you have to let me lock you up once. After being locked up so many times, she had to take revenge. Lock me up? Beligaju's lips curled up. His tone was a little slow. Hellion Vivian thought about it and said, You can't bring the fire, Qilin. Beligaju put his hand on her head and stroked her hair. Hellion Vivian raised her eyebrows. So easy to talk to? Do I need to bring a fire Kirin to deal with you? Beligaju's thin lips curved and there was a smile in his voice. It was that look of contempt again. Hellion Vivian took a deep breath and said, You can't wear the armament I made for you either. This time, Beligaju did not immediately agree. Hellion Vivian smiled. What? Don't you think it's easy to deal with me? Do you think it will be difficult to win if I don't let you bring armaments? Wei. When Beligaju said those two words, he smiled faintly. Why don't you tell me what you want your husband to bring? Hellion Vivian raised her eyes and glanced at his extremely two-faced appearance. Then she leaned over and kissed his eyes. I won't bring anything. You have to yield to me. Beligaju pondered and raised his eyebrows. You want to tie me up that much? That wasn't the main point. The main point was to take the initiative. How could she take the initiative? Hellion Vivian smiled. Then it's settled. I'll go call Little White out first. Also, I remember that I put my 1000 chance umbrella in the drawer. Do you want this lord to give the fire Qilin to you and have it listen to your commands? Beligaju put his hands behind his head and crossed his slender legs. Hellion Vivian buried her head and tidied up her things. She didn't forget to turn her head and say, No need. Don't try to send the fire Qilin to my side as a spy. I won't accept it. She had integrity. You really don't need it? Beligaju slowly sat up. His robes fell down and his slender fingers played with the silver ring on his finger. His voice was indifferent. With the fire Qilin, you still have a chance to win. Hellion Wei took her own metal box and picked out a few pieces of pastries. She put one in his mouth and ate one herself before saying, You're so kind, it's too abnormal. Your Highness, do you think I don't know? There is a contract between a divine beast and its master. One of the contracts is that the divine beast can't attack its master. Beligaju slowly swallowed the food in his mouth. Hellion Vivian saw that he finished eating and gave him another piece. Beligaju looked at her actions. His eyes carried a warmth that had never been seen in front of others. It's rare that you know this. It seemed that this time he had to think of another way to make her take the initiative. That's why I said that I studied a lot. Don't lie to me. Hellion Vivian clapped her hands. The desserts are also finished. Let's start. Beligaju raised his good-looking eyebrows. Okay. Hellion Vivian narrowed her eyes and looked at him. Her finger moved and the wind formed in the air drifted towards Beligaju's direction. However, when the wind arrived in front of him, it was like it was blocked by a screen. It didn't have any effect. Instead, it gently dispersed. Crush. More than half of the porcelain behind him broke. Hellion Vivian was stunned at first. Then she smiled. Her body turned and like a shadow, she appeared in front of Beligaju with a whoosh. She raised her left leg high and was about to chop down at Beligaju. But in the next moment she abruptly pulled back and took a few steps back. Her eyebrows slightly wrinkled. You didn't use martial chi? Didn't you say that I should let you win? Beligaju grabbed her hand and pulled her into his arms. Okay, now that you've won, how do you want to tie me up? Hellion Vivian didn't answer his question. Instead she frowned. Why didn't you use martial chi just now? Baligaju didn't say anything. He just slightly narrowed his eyes. For no reason, people couldn't help but have a cold feeling that made them want to investigate. Hellion Vivian's eyes flashed. She directly lifted his hand. Your martial chi disappeared? It's temporary. Baligaju seemed to be used to it. He put down his long sleeves. The side of his face was perfect and cold like a sculpture. Hellion Vivian remembered that he was also in this situation last time. She quickly looked at his eyes. Can you still see? Did I hurt you just now? You don't have martial chi but you still agreed to my competition? Didn't you always want to win against me? Baligaju chuckled. This is a good opportunity. Hellion Vivian glared at him. Quickly go back and lie down. You're not tying me up? Baligaju raised his lips and smiled. Hellion Vivian was helpless. She directly pushed someone's back and pushed him to the side of the dragon bed. Lie down. Just lie down. Baligaju looked at her with a faint smile. He sighed slightly. Okay, if only I could recover my martial chi. Fire Qilin couldn't stand it anymore. He couldn't help but jump out. Master, what are you planning? You obviously didn't lose your martial chi. It must be a trick of self-injury. Master, is it really good for you to be so shameless? Get out. Bailey Jiaju unhurriedly gave the order. His voice carried a hint of evil intent. I don't like people watching me do things. Chapter 534. It knew it was a trick of self-injury. It just didn't know what Master was planning. Why aren't you leaving? Baligaju glanced at Fire Qilin and said calmly, Do you want me to lock you up again? Fire Qilin's red fur trembled. It didn't dare to stay any longer. It turned around and left the palace. It stretched out its claws and wiped off its cold sweat. Master was too ruthless. He actually wanted to lock it up again. It didn't want to go to that little black hole to reflect on its mistakes. It was very troublesome without butterflies. Besides, it had so many worshippers it couldn't just be locked up like that. Is boss. Boss is so handsome. He is handsome. But why does boss's expression look so bad? The little spirit beasts that were hiding outside the palace looked at Fire Qilin in unison. Their big watery eyes were very bright. Fire Qilin immediately stood up straight. It raised its head and puffed out its chest. Its posture was very good. What a cool boss. Boss is definitely going to go in. It can't be. Didn't boss just come out from there? Boss just came out to take a walk and see if we are in danger. After that it will go in. Fire Qilin. When did it say it was going to go in? It didn't dare to go in again. Boss. A little earth beast ran over and said shyly, If you go in, can you bring us with you? We always wanted to see how beautiful that big house is. Fire Qilin just opened its mouth. Another little earth beast interrupted it. Boss is so handsome. It will definitely agree to us. Really? The little earth beast squatting in front of Fire Qilin looked up with bright eyes. Then boss, let's go in quickly. Fire Qilin. Why did things develop to this point? It didn't say anything. Don't make up stories. Fire Qilin coughed twice. It seemed to have thought of something. He just said that you are in danger. What danger are you in? The little earth beasts looked at each other and then looked left and right. Something came to the palace recently. It's very scary. What is it? The Fire Qilin suddenly narrowed its eyes. The little earth beast shook their heads. We're not too sure either. As soon as it appeared we all hid. Why can't I sense it? The Fire Qilin looked at its own claws. If there was some kind of beast it would be impossible for it not to smell it. The little earth beasts lowered their voices and said, That thing knows how to hide. There are humans covering for it. Boss hasn't been in the palace these days, and it has already created a lot of resentment. Where is it now? Fire Qilin's eyes narrowed. The little earth beast shook their heads again. I don't know. We never fought it head-on. All the little earth beasts that met it were devoured by it. At this point the little earth beasts clearly felt fear, and their small bodies began to tremble. However, we know roughly where it is. We have never dared to go to that place. As they spoke, the little earth beasts pointed towards the east. It's there. Chaoyang Hall. The Fire Qilin paused and frowned. Wasn't that where the emperor lived? Just as the fire Qilin was deep in thought, a figure suddenly appeared behind it. The little earth beasts huddled together in fear. BB boss. The fire Qilin naturally felt the presence behind it. Just as it was about to raise its claws, the person hugged its neck. Third brother isn't here today. I must eat you. The fire Qilin immediately knew who the voice belonged to. Seventh Highness. Qilin meat should be very delicious. The little one poked its head with a finger with a serious face. The fire Qilin then remembered that it was invisible. Logically speaking, other than its master, normal humans shouldn't be able to see it. Then what's going on with Seventh Highness? The fire Qilin suddenly raised its head. For the first time, it seriously looked at the little one that it was familiar with. It slowly narrowed its eyes. Lil 7 didn't care what it was thinking. While third brother wasn't here, it must be roasted. The little one bent his head to take a look. Then he directly pulled the fire Qilin's tail and dragged it forward. He didn't care whether his action would cause the surrounding plants to wither or not. In short, no one could stop him from eating. In the room, Beligaju could clearly see this scene through the window. His thin lips curved, as if he was very satisfied with this situation where two light bulbs were removed at the same time. Hellion Vivian was still worried about his eyes. When did this situation start? What situation? Beligaju retracted his gaze. He seemed to be a little weak. Hellion Vivian looked at his slightly pale lips. You lose your martial chi from time to time. Is it because of the fire? Sort of. Beligaju's hand paused. He seemed to be indifferent. You know about that fire too? Hellion Vivian nodded. Everyone in the capital knows. It said that the fire was very big. The entire palace was destroyed. From that day onwards you had a serious illness and lost all your martial chi. Serious illness. Bailey Jiaju faintly smiled with a hint of mockery. Hellion Vivian raised her eyebrows. Is it wrong? No, it's very right. Beligaju pulled her over. There was a dark light in his eyes. There were some things that he couldn't let her know, absolutely not. Hellion Vivian looked up at him. Don't worry, I won't let those who hurt you have an easy time. They made you become like this, so I will make them bleed. Beligaju looked at the serious little face in front of him. He turned over and pressed Hellion Vivian into the bright red brocade quilt. His eyes sank. I don't have any martial chi now. Dual cultivation is the fastest and most effective way to recover my martial chi. It's just that my eyes can't see clearly, so you have to take the initiative. He's right about this. Yuan Ming couldn't wait to jump out. Woman, quickly dual cultivate. Dual cultivation is good for both of you. If he can recover his martial chi, you can also. Without waiting for Yuan Ming to finish speaking, Hellion Vivian closed her eyes and closed the fantasy space. Her eyes met the handsome face that could enchant any woman. Just as she hesitated, she heard Beligaju's low voice. It was hoarse. If you don't want to, I won't force you. Who said I don't want to? Isn't it just taking the initiative? Hellion Vivian paused for a moment. Then she did as she said. She directly leaned over and kissed Beligaju's face. Then she kissed his lips and his well-defined jaw. Chapter 535. Hellion Vivian didn't see the faint smile on the man's face. His long robe fell and rose and fell until Hellion Wei Wei leaned over awkwardly. However, he suddenly regained his strength and pressed his palm on her back. Your skills are so bad. Hellion Wei Wei's pair of eyes were dyed red. That pair of eyes looked more beautiful than ever before, enough to evoke the thought of completely destroying her. Beligaju didn't intend to hold back. He put more strength on his waist and pressed his forehead against hers. He chuckled, it's rare to see you like this. Sure enough, when you take the initiative, it makes people want to tear you apart even more. By Beligaju. Hellion Vivian instantly understood what was going on. You didn't lose your martial chi at all. Beligaju kissed her gently and said, let me teach you what it means to attack the heart first. I hid my martial chi, so you will definitely be anxious. Shameless. Hellion Vivian bit her thin lips and stretched her neck, but she couldn't resist the numbness. Beligaju smiled wickedly. If I'm not shameless, how can I let you take the initiative? Be good, it will make you feel good. Their voices gradually faded and the red curtain fell, rippling layers of ripples. God knows how long it took. If the retired emperor didn't send someone to wait outside the palace, it was estimated that it would be endless. However, His Highness, who was interrupted, was not in a good mood. His finely made black nightgown was half open, and his ink-black hair hung down on both sides. His handsome side profile was still cold and noble. "What's the matter? Why are you so anxious?" "It's the little seventh prince." The eunuch didn't dare to raise his head to look at him and replied with a numb scalp. Beligaju drank a mouthful of tea handed over by Shadow and said in a calm voice, "What's wrong with the little seventh prince?" The little seventh prince caught the mythological beast fire chilin and insisted on roasting it. When he said this, the eunuch felt that it was inconceivable. What kind of thing was the fire chilin? It was the head of the 4 great mythological beasts. Many people who saw it only wanted to tame it for their own use. Only the little seventh prince wanted to eat it. Beligaju slowly raised his eyes. "Then let him roast it." "Ah." The eunuch couldn't believe his ears. If he remembered correctly, wasn't the fire chilin the royal family's mount? His Highness actually agreed. Originally, Eunuch Sun called him over to ask the royal family to stop the little seventh prince. The little Highness only listens to the royal family. Now the royal family had no intention of stopping them. How was he going to report back? The retired emperor was so angry that he wanted to kick the little seventh prince out of the palace again. If he roasted the fire chilin, the little seventh prince would definitely be chased back to the mountain. Although the little seventh prince usually ate whatever he saw, which made them feel helpless, with the little seventh prince around, the palace was always livelier. Both the retired emperor and Eunuch Sun seemed to be in a good mood. These 2 days the palace was getting gloomier and gloomier. They really didn't want the little seventh prince to leave. Just when the eunuch was full of worry, the curtain moved and Hellion Vivian walked out in a white robe. She glanced at Beligaju and said, "Roasting the fire chilin is not a good way to cook. His Highness won't be anxious if you say so. The little seventh prince knows how to eat. He hunted such a nutritious fire chilin. Where's he? I'll go and take a look and tell him how to cook this dish." The eunuch. He was here to ask someone to stop the little seventh prince, not to ask for help. Even the princess consort was thinking about the fire chilin. And just now, the princess consort glared at his Highness. "Your Highness, how did you provoke the little seventh prince and the princess consort? They treat your mount like this." Beligaju looked at Hellion Vivian with a faint smile. The eunuch saw hope in an instant. "His Highness, stop her. Stop the princess consort. I'm also curious how to cook the fire chilin." Bailey Jiaju walked up to Hellion Weiwei and reached out to pull her into his arms, making her whole body stick close to him. He rubbed her waist with his fingers and said, "Shall we go and have a look together?" Hellion Vivian could still feel the heat on his body. She didn't dare to move, afraid that he would do something else. Her ears turned red, at this time in the palace where the retired emperor lived. Eunuch Sun's mouth was dry. "Little master, this fire chilin can't be eaten. Let's eat something else, okay?" "No." The little one did not even raise his head. He strode forward with his thick little legs and dragged the fire chilin forward again, exerting his strength with a whoosh sound. Eunuch Sun still wanted to say something. The retired emperor took a deep breath and said, "Let him eat it. I'd like to see how he roasted the fire chilin. He's getting more and more ridiculous." "Imperial grandfather, you're blocking my way." The little one raised his little face and said, "You have to move away so that I can roast the fire chilin. You've been blocking my way since just now. Can't you let me eat in peace?" The retired emperor pointed at him and said, You, I want to start a fire." The little one squatted down and asked, "Imperial grandfather, please get me some firewood." Third sister-in-law said that it's delicious to roast with fruit wood. The retired emperor was so angry that he laughed. "How dare you ask me for firewood? You brat. Where's third brother? Why isn't he here yet? You called third brother." With a swoosh, the little one straightened his body and pulled the fire chilin's tail over. Shaking his short little legs, he attempted to slip away. However, before he could take a step, a faint voice came from behind. "Where are you dragging the fire chilin to?" The little one froze and turned to look at Beligaju. The fire chilin let out a long sigh and communicated with Beligaju through consciousness. "Master, you're finally here. The little seventh prince is too strong. I can't get rid of him. Hurry up and let him let go of my tail." Beligaju looked at the fire chilin slowly. He did not respond to the fire chilin. Instead he smiled and said, "If you want to eat, you can eat here." "Really?" The little one's eyes lit up. The fire Qilin was petrified. Wait a minute. What's going on? Is Master really going to let the little seventh prince eat me? Although my skin is thick and can't be roasted, I'll be embarrassed if other spirit beasts see me like this. Since Master won't save me, I can only save myself. Don't run. The little one pulled its tail and said seriously, "Third brother said to eat here." When the fire Qilin was pulled, the things around it trembled. Hellion Vivian looked at the little seventh prince's actions and frowned. Although she knew that the little seventh prince was strong, wasn't it a little too unusual for him to be able to grab the fire Qilin? Chapter 536. The fire Qilin also paused. It had used 30% of its strength just now. Why couldn't it get rid of him with 30% of its strength? What was going on? The fire Qilin subconsciously looked at Baligaju. Master. Baligaju raised his hand, indicating that it didn't need to say anything. The little one reached out and tied the fire Qilin to the side. Then he carried the dried fruit over. He tilted his head and thought for a while. Then he leaned over and bit the fire Qilin. The fire Qilin suddenly moved. Its eyes darkened even more. It immediately turned around and began to communicate with Baligaju. Master, I felt pain just now. Logically speaking, even a spirit beast wouldn't make me feel pain, let alone a human. Everyone knew that the Qilin's skin was thick and invulnerable. However, the little one in front of him could hurt it. This was not normal. It doesn't taste good. The little one spat out. Hellion Vivian walked over and said with a wicked smile, "It won't taste good if you eat it raw. You need to add seasoning. Make it for me, third sister-in-law." After the little one finished speaking, he hugged Baligaju's leg. "Third brother, lend third sister-in-law to me for a while. I want to eat Qilin meat." Baligaju glanced at him and said in a calm voice, "Eat a mouthful of Qilin meat and dance for a day. You decide whether to eat it or not." When the little one heard the word dance, his little hands instinctively covered his pants. He shook his head like a rattledrum. "Third brother, you can't always make me dance. That's not right. Do you want to eat it or not?" Baligaju didn't even listen to him. He reached out and picked the little one up. The little one was anxious. His little legs swayed back and forth. He pouted and didn't say anything. Baligaju raised him until they were at eye level. He said calmly, "If you don't eat the fire Qilin, I'll give you 10 more meat buns. I want to eat 20. 10 is too little." The little one's eyes lit up again. Baligaju smiled. "You want to negotiate? Forget it, you should just dance." 15. The little one pouted. "Third brother, I can't go any lower." Baligaju turned around and ordered Eunuch's son, "Go get him 15 meat buns." Yes. Eunuch's son looked at the sky silently. If he had known that the meat bun would be able to solve the problem, why would he have waited here for so long? However, the little one felt that he had profited. He counted with his small hands and said, "Third brother, 15 meat buns. I can eat 3 meat buns a day for 5 days. I just bit into the fire Qilin's meat and it doesn't taste good at all." Fire Qilin, how dare he despise it? "There's nothing delicious about its hard skin," Baligaju said calmly. Fire Qilin was speechless. However, Baligaju lowered his eyes and continued, "You have to remember that you can't eat my food." Hearing these words, the retired emperor was somewhat gratified. This was how the child should be educated. The little one frowned. "What about Imperial Grandfather's food?" "What do you?" Baligaju gave the little one 2 words and left with the fire Qilin and the others. The retired emperor's roar could be heard faintly. "Don't stop me. I'm going to teach those 2 a lesson today." Third sister-in-law, Imperial Grandfather's temper is getting worse. The little one took a bite of the meat bun. "We're already so obedient, but he's still so grumpy." Hellion Vivian pinched his face. "If you're really obedient, tell me how you dragged the fire Qilin here." "With my hands." The little one puffed up his cheeks. Hellion Vivian wiped the corner of his mouth with a handkerchief. "Little 7, you have to restrain your strength in the future, especially in front of outsiders. Do you understand?" The little one paused and raised his eyes to look at his third brother. Baligaju nodded at him. "I know." The little one had a domineering look on his face. "I don't need to use my strength to beat them down. Third sister-in-law, tell me if anyone bullies you. Tell me if you want to eat fish. I've been practicing my fishing recently." I've already eaten all the fish in Eunuch Sun's favorite pond. Hellion Vivian was silent. She thought that Eunuch Sun didn't know about this. If he knew, he wouldn't have stopped the retired emperor. The fire Qilin stood behind the two of them. It retracted its gaze from the little one and looked into Beligaju's eyes. Master, I'm sure that the little seventh prince is not an ordinary human. Who is born in the imperial family is ordinary? Beligaju turned the silver ring on his finger. In the flickering light, a trace of gold overflowed from his eyes. Arrange a few spirit beasts to follow little seven and protect him. The fire Qilin looked at its master's eyes and its heart skipped a beat. Yes. Why is this happening? I haven't found all the soul fragments. Why is my master showing signs of demonization? No. I have to increase the search for the soul fragments as soon as possible. Otherwise, if the soul is not complete, my master will be demonized completely. If that's the case, no one can stop him. Go to the Chaoyang Palace. Beligaju's voice sounded again. The fire Qilin narrowed its eyes. Master, you noticed it too? Of course I noticed it. The smell of blood is so strong. Beligaju licked his thin lips with the tip of his tongue. There was a hint of evil on his face. Find it for me. Yes. At dusk, the sun was setting. Hellion Vivian was leisurely drinking tea with little seven when they saw two palace maids walking out of the Chaoyang Palace. They looked around as if they were afraid of something. They even looked back every 3 steps. Usually they wouldn't do this. After all, there were rules in the palace. How palace maids should walk and how they should greet their masters were all in accordance with the rules. But now they seemed to be afraid of something and even forgot the rules. Eunuch Sundate, Hellion Vivian retracted her gaze and put the teacup on the table. What's wrong with those palace maids? Eunuch Sun poured her a cup of tea and lowered his voice. Princess Consort has been outside the palace for the past few days, so you don't know what's going on in the palace. I don't know what's going on in the palace, but there have been many palace maids dying in the palace. The way they died is very strange. Strange. Hellion Vivian's fingers paused. What's so strange? Eunuch Sun hesitated for a while before saying, someone drained their blood and threw them into the river. I don't know who did this. At first, the retired emperor didn't notice. After all, the palace is so big. No one would know if 2 or 3 palace maids died. Later, someone found 7 or 8 dried corpses by the river. This matter was revealed. But I don't know who the murderer is. The method is too cruel and evil. Today, the elders even told the retired emperor to invite some eminent monks to read scriptures. It's good to calm the people. Chapter 537. These elders are really interesting. So many people died, but what's the use of reading scriptures? Yuan Ming's mocking voice sounded. Hellion Vivian curled her lips. It's useless to the murderer, but it's useful to me, the possessor. Yuan Ming suddenly narrowed his eyes. It seems that we have the same idea. These eminent monks were most likely invited by those elders to deal with you. Hellion Vivian nodded. Holding the teacup, she leaned back and casually asked Eunuch Sun, the retired emperor should have agreed, right? He agreed. Eunuch Sun smiled. The elders said it in a justified manner, so there's nothing to decline. Princess Consort, you also know that those old officials, as long as they know their place, the retired emperor won't bother to say anything more to them. Hellion Vivian nodded. He should have agreed. If he didn't agree, it would make others think too much, and then the situation would be bad. The retired emperor asked this servant to inform Princess Consort. If you hear the Buddhist chanting, don't feel strange. It's said that they plan to chant for an entire day. I don't know if it has any effect. Eunuch Sun let out a long sigh. I've also seen those few little palace maids who died. It's a pity that they're all gone. Hellion Vivian's index finger rhythmically tapped the edge of the teacup. This was a movement she often did when she was thinking. Just now, Eunuch Sun said that the bodies were found by the river. I've been in the palace for so long, but I haven't seen a river in the palace. That area is remote. If you haven't been in the palace for a few years, you won't know. Eunuch Sun said this and looked to both sides. It's behind the cold palace. It's strange. It was originally just a small puddle of water that came in from the moat. I don't know what happened during this period, but the water level kept rising and became a river. If you ask this old servant, if the water level didn't rise, the situation wouldn't have been discovered so late. It's really a coincidence. Life and death are fated. Hearing this, Hellion Vivian smiled meaningfully. It's really too much of a coincidence. Eunuch Sun was a very astute person. He didn't know how to analyze the case, but he was still obedient. When he saw that Hellion Vivian's tone wasn't right, he raised an eyebrow. Does Wang Fei mean that there is something else going on? Hellion Vivian put down the teacup in her hand and said, Eunuch Sun, do you still remember the mission the retired emperor gave us when His Highness and I went to Fuping? Yes. Eunuch Sun hurriedly said, Fuping has a large area and is suitable for farming. However, due to the severe drought in the past 2 years, the harvest has been seriously affected. The retired emperor has been worried about Fuping recently. Fortunately, Princess Consort and His Highness went to Fuping this time and solved this problem. Hellion Vivian smiled casually and said, Fuping isn't the only dry place. Even the capital hasn't had any rain recently. It's related to the season. Eunuch Sun, don't you think it's strange? Last month was the rainy season, but the small puddle you mentioned didn't rise much. This month there hasn't been any rain for more than 10 days, but the puddle has risen. Don't you think it's strange? Eunuch Sun was stunned. Then he suddenly stood up straight and looked very excited. Princess Consort. Eunuch Sun died. Before Eunuch Sun could continue, Hellion Vivian interrupted him. Eunuch Sun, just pretend that you didn't hear this. After all, if it wasn't because of the rain, it was very likely that there was a problem with the management of the moat. As for the flow of the moat, if it wasn't controlled by the higher-ups, no one would dare to make such a blatant change. Eunuch Sun's fingers trembled slightly. This is not a trivial matter. Precisely because it's not a trivial matter, Hellion Vivian took a sip of tea and said, that's why Eunuch Sun can't mention it. Eunuch Sun glanced at Hellion Vivian and lowered his eyes, saying, this old servant understands. The moat was under the jurisdiction of the emperor's trusted subordinates. Even if the retired emperor's power was great, he was not in that position. Some things as a servant it was better for him not to say too much. But why did it have to be the moat that had a problem? When will the eminent monks arrive? Hellion Vivian changed the topic with a light smile, as if she wanted to make Eunuch Sun feel more relaxed. Eunuch Sun pulled out of his thoughts. I heard that it's tomorrow at noon. It's not easy to find so many respected masters all of a sudden. We have to prepare more on time. That's right. Hellion Vivian lowered her eyes and took another sip of tea. The corner of her mouth hooked up into a cold smile. Yuan Ming took advantage of the fact that Eunuch Sun couldn't see him and approached Hellion Vivian's ear with an evil smile. They are so well prepared. It seems that they deliberately want to kill you. As soon as Elder Yun died, they became anxious. Hellion Vivian widened her eyes. The more anxious they are, the more it means that they are afraid. My grandfather was a military man, but he died a strange death. Now it's clear who's behind this. Yuan Ming raised his eyebrows, but his smile didn't diminish. At that time, I was able to come to your side because you had hatred in your heart. That's why you woke me up in that kind of situation. Later on, Madame Su died, and that heartless father of yours was hacked to death by Prime Minister Su by the side of the road. The Hellion family was once again in your hands, but I didn't extricate myself from the contract. Without taking my revenge, I can't leave. From the very beginning, this matter wasn't simple. Hellion Vivian played with the teacup in her hand. Otherwise, why do you think I let the Su family stay for so long? Yuan Ming shrugged. That's what you say, but with your current ability, you can split them up and deal with them one by one. Once they join hands, I'm afraid that your future path will be very difficult. Previously you were always in the dark. Because of your trash status, they didn't take precautions at all. Now they are taking the initiative to attack. Are you sure you can withstand it? How long do you think I can last tomorrow? Hellion Vivian asked Yuan Ming in return. Yuan Ming stretched his waist. The current you is completely different from the time of your wedding. If it wasn't for the deep resentment in the palace, these scriptures might not have been able to force you out. What I'm afraid of is that you have been dreaming a lot recently, and your soul has long been somewhat unstable. If you're lucky, you can hold on for an hour. An hour. Hellion Vivian narrowed her eyes. These masters chant scriptures in the early hours of the morning and at night. I don't have to appear, but they actually want to enter the palace by any means possible. They must have already thought of a reason that I must be present. Yuan Ming smiled. No matter how you look at it, it's a dead end. You might as well just give me your soul and I'll help you kill them. Yuan Ming, how many times have I told you, I'm not interested in this deal of yours. Hellion Vivian stood up, her voice faint. As long as I'm still standing here, there's no such thing as a dead end. Chapter 538. Yuan Ming's interest was piqued. What do you plan to do? I'll make use of them to blow up the case in the palace. Then I'll be able to investigate more thoroughly. Hellion Vivian played with the silver ring on her finger. However, I have a feeling that this case is not as simple as it seems. It is indeed not simple. Little White jumped out and said in a cold voice, I've just been to the river that the eunuch mentioned. The resentment is very strong. The bottom of the river has been dyed red with blood. According to the 5 elements and 8 trigrams, mountains belong to Yang and water belongs to Yin. Now that people have died in the water, it is simply a great ominous array. Then it leaped forward. Look over there. Hellion Vivian followed its gaze and squinted. Dead fish. Eunuch's son also heard Hellion Vivian's words and said, Sigh, don't mention it. I don't know what is going on. For 2 days in a row these fish have died in batches. Maybe the water quality is not good. Hellion Vivian retracted her gaze and waved at the little one. The little 7th prince was seriously eating a meat bun. When he saw Hellion Vivian calling him, he walked over with his little face held high. He was very domineering. Third sister-in-law, do you want to beat someone up? Let's go now. Hellion Vivian was speechless. Other than eating, he only knew how to beat people up. Is this really okay? No, I want to tell you that you can eat fish, but you can't eat the floating ones. Do you understand? Hellion Vivian squatted down and looked into the little one's eyes. Her eyes were full of love. The little one looked at the surface of the lake and then turned his head around. His little face was full of seriousness. I know. The smell of those fishes has spread all the way here. Third brother has told me before that I can't touch smelly things. Smelly? Little White moved the tip of its nose and its silver cat eyes darkened. Why didn't it smell it? Logically speaking, its sense of smell should be better than a child's. Yuan Ming smiled with an evil look. This little 7th prince is really interesting, isn't he? Little White raised its head and narrowed its eyes into a straight line. Do you know something? Is he on your side? Compared to you, I do know a little more. Yuan Ming smiled like a demon. The extra point is that I can be sure that he is not on our side. He does not have the demonic nature. Little White was in disbelief. Not a demon? Then what is he? No matter what he is, that woman has no intention of guarding against him. She even dotes on him like he's a treasure, so there's no need for us to find out. Yuan Ming looked at the surface of the lake and sighed deeply. I'm really becoming more and more handsome. Hellion Wei Wei strolled over and pretended that she was going to burn the ancient book. Then I'll ask the increasingly handsome person to tell me everything you know. Little 7, what exactly is he? Hey. Yuan Ming jumped up and blew out the fire with a single breath. If there's anything you want to say it properly. Don't keep threatening this sovereign. Hellion Vivian put down the ancient book and crossed her arms. She raised her eyebrows and said, Speak. I'm just making some deductions. Yuan Ming smiled playfully. He has boundless strength at such a young age and his sense of smell is so sharp. He is even more powerful than Bai Zai's descendant. From the moment he was born, his body was full of righteousness and was impervious to evil. Apart from spirit beasts, I really can't think of anything else that can be like this. Hellion Vivian frowned. You're saying that Shao-Chi is not a human but a beast? Spirit beasts also have a human form. Little White's voice was indifferent. Our bodies are divided into beast form and human form. It depends on which form is more convenient. But why can't I feel any spirit beast's aura on his body? Yuan Ming smiled evilly. You can't feel it because he is too powerful. He can bite through the fire Qilin's skin. Who do you think he is? You're saying that he... Little White suddenly raised his eyes and looked at the little person who was squatting and playing with the ants. Impossible, this is absolutely impossible. When the exorcism seal fell and that person disappeared, even Ksitigarbha Bodhisattva couldn't appease him. That's why he didn't hesitate to summon the flames of hell in order to kill him. At that time he was already swallowed by the flames, wasn't he? Yuan Ming laughed. Who knows what happened back then? Moreover, he is not like the fire Qilin. Even when he is always by that person's side, he rarely appears unless that person is in danger. Everyone says that the fire Qilin is the head of the 4 divine beasts because people often overlook it. If you think about it carefully, he is the one who has been by that person's side the longest. He is also the one who is the most difficult to deal with. Otherwise, why can't Ksitigarbha Bodhisattva appease him? But how did he turn into a child? Little White hesitated and looked at the little person. Hellion Vivian could naturally hear the voices of these two people. She said indifferently, maybe he didn't change. That's right. Who said that he must change? Yuan Ming's eyes glowed. Maybe it's because his human form is that of a child. That's why that person who doesn't even care about gods and demons dotes on him endlessly. Hellion Vivian's expression was indifferent. That's not important. What's important is that little Seven's abilities are different from ordinary people, but he can't control them well. Help me keep an eye on him in the future. Don't let the 4 great elders find out about him. You don't need us to keep an eye on him. Yuan Ming looked at the forest on the right. Your man has protected him very well. His abilities definitely didn't show up at this time. It's your man who has been good at using his methods for so many years that his abilities haven't been magnified. It's hard to control them recently. It's probably because the resentment in the palace is too strong. Just like in the White Academy, someone tried to use resentment to tame the divine dragon. However, the array formation this time isn't directed at him. When the little one saw that Hellion Vivian was standing there motionless, he immediately pricked up his little ears and called out, "Third sister-in-law, I've finished my meat bun." Hellion Vivian turned around and smiled. "Come here. I'll wipe your hands for you. You can eat the second one." "Okay." The little one nodded heavily and obediently stretched out his 2 little hands. Hellion Vivian smiled. She took the little one's hands and wiped them with a handkerchief. Then she divided the meat bun into 2 halves and only gave him half. "Eat less. I'll make black pepper beef for you tonight." "Beef." The little one's eyes lit up. He touched his body with a fierce expression. At first, Hellion Vivian didn't know what he was touching. When he pulled out the snake head from his clothes and threw it to the side in a domineering manner, Hellion Vivian pressed her forehead. "Little Seven, why are you grabbing these dangerous things?" Chapter 539. It's food. Little 7th Prince said seriously, "But I don't need it now. It's not as delicious as beef." Green snake. You're so capricious. Have you considered our feelings as snakes? Little 7th Prince saw that the snake was not moving, so he bent down and poked it with his finger. He said in a domineering manner, "Go away or I'll feed you to the fire Qilin." Hearing the name of the fire Qilin, the green snake's expression changed. It disappeared into the bushes with a whoosh. Hellion Vivian found it funny. She pulled the little one over and walked side by side with him. "What else do you want to eat besides beef?" "Anything is fine." Little 7th Prince could be very calm sometimes. He was not a picky eater. Hellion Vivian said slowly, "How about I make you some potato chips?" "Potato chips." The little one's eyes lit up as he scratched his little ears. He was very excited. "Okay." Hellion Wei Wei watched as he kept scratching a certain spot, so she ordered someone to bring some medicine to stop the itch. Then she said, "Then I'll make a plate of potato chips for you first. You can watch me cook while you eat." The little one nodded obediently. Hellion Vivian was almost melted by his cuteness. She smiled faintly and applied the medicine on his ears. The little one did not hide. Instead, he pouted and complained to Hellion Vivian, "Mosquitoes, you're so annoying. They bit you. Of course you'd hate them." Hellion Vivian rubbed his soft ears. The little one shook his little head and said, "Third sister-in-law, you're wrong. It's not because they bit me. It's because they're too dirty to eat." Hellion Vivian. Okay, she was wrong again. She should not have thought of a foodie as an ordinary person. To prevent the little one from saying something shocking again, Hellion Vivian quickly cut the potato chips as soon as they returned to the palace. Her knife skills were very good. The shredded potatoes were cut neatly. She wrapped them with flour and then put them in the oil pan. It was crispy and tender on the outside, fragrant and crunchy in the mouth. Her mouth was filled with the rich fragrance of potatoes, and there was also a layer of grape jam on the side, which was what the imperial kitchen used to make snacks. The little one was eating happily. His little body followed beside Hellion Vivian. He stared at the chopping board while eating potato chips. He looked adorable. Eunuch's son watched from the side in disbelief. Wang Fei really has a way. In this way, master will be much more relaxed. The little eunuch behind him was very perceptive. He handed a cup of tea to Eunuch Sunday. Eunuch Sun took it and drank a mouthful. Who said otherwise? In the past, when the royal family was busy, I had to chase after His Highness all over the palace. Now there's someone who can cure him. Other than His Highness, he is only so obedient in front of Wang Fei. Even when he was in front of Headmaster Tu Su, he was not so worry-free. By the way, you also have to watch His Highness. Recently the palace is in chaos. There are some places that you can't go. You must be on guard in advance. This palace, I'm afraid, is going to change. Yes. The little eunuch took the order and left. In the evening in the hall, the lights were shining. A man in white stood looking weak and elegant. The three elders have thought it through. Do you really want to lure the eminent monks into the palace? Even you said that this Hellion Vivian is very likely to be possessed by someone. One of the elders sneered. If she knows her place, it's fine. But if she keeps pushing us, we have no reason to let her go. We used to underestimate this girl. I didn't expect that she would do so many things in less than 2 months. Tu Su Feng brought her into the battle spirit forces and targeted us. Who knows what kind of methods she will use to deal with us in the future. That year we gave face to her grandfather and spared her life. Now it's time to cut the weeds and dig up the roots. The white-clothed man smiled. Elder Wu, do you really think that Hellion Vivian dealing with the 4 elders was Tu Su Feng's doing? What do you mean, young master? The other elders who were drinking tea paused. The white-clothed man turned around. His fair and handsome face revealed a sickly look. That year the Hellion family was exterminated. Old Master Hellion died strangely. In the end, only Hellion Vivian was left. The reason why the various elders allowed her to stay was not because of Elder Hellion's face, but because of the Hellion blood in her body. It was said that the Hellion blood had the innate power of exorcism. Once someone possessed it, their martial chi would greatly increase. She's just a little girl. It's a pity to kill her. It's better to keep her as a blood bank. The elders did this, so they must have left behind some clues. Since I can find it, the current Hellion Vivian will definitely be able to find it as well. Therefore, it was not Tu Su Feng's idea to overthrow the elders. He would not do things with such a clear goal. The one who really wanted to get rid of the elders was Hellion Vivian herself. Then all the more reason to get rid of her. Elder Wu narrowed his eyes and put down the teacup in his hand. His eyes were filled with poisonous intent. The other 2 elders' faces also darkened. The incident that year was a grudge in their hearts. Once it was known by everyone, the image of the 4 elders protecting the Dragon War Empire for many years would be destroyed. Their supreme authority would also be affected. Therefore Hellion Vivian must be eliminated. The man in white turned his back, lowered his eyes and lightly coughed a few times. Hellion Wei Wei's identity is not ordinary. It's not that easy to deal with her. How difficult it is to deal with that prince in the palace. I'm sure the 3 elders are clearer than me. How can you guarantee that the plan will be absolutely foolproof? Young master need not worry about this. Elder Wu took a sip of tea and smiled sinisterly. With the Emperor's help, no matter how difficult it is to deal with the 3rd prince, it will be useless. When the time comes when the eminent monks start chanting, Hellion Vivian will definitely show her true form. The white-clothed man stopped his fingers and did not say anything else. Instead, the corner of his mouth curved into a mocking smile. When the sun had completely set and only Elder Ming was left in the hall, he opened his mouth again. When you enter the palace tomorrow, remember what I told you. Once the eminent monks finish chanting, regardless of whether Elder Wu succeeds or not, you must lure Hellion Vivian to the riverside. Master, I will naturally accomplish what you said. Elder Ming's posture was very strange. His head was drooping and his mouth was letting out a hoarse laugh. The white-clothed man faintly glanced at him. You have been a human for so many days, but you still can't learn the habits of a human. Remember, no matter what, you must not reveal the slightest clue. Especially your sitting and standing posture. If there is even the slightest mistake, you know what the result will be. Chapter 540. Master, don't worry. I'm only acting like this in front of you. It's normal in front of others. Elder Ming stuck out his tongue and licked his hand. His entire body was filled with demonic aura. It's just that wearing this skin is really uncomfortable. I'm afraid that I won't be able to control myself and will want to eat people when those monks start chanting. Hearing this, the man in white raised his finger and an invisible talisman appeared on Elder Ming's body. With this talisman, no matter how those monks chant, they won't be able to affect you. Master has a way. Elder Ming straightened his neck, but he was still a little afraid. Baligaju, the man in white looked at him. The more you care, the more you lose your usual shrewdness. Elder Wu, since you're dealing with Hellion Vivian, Baligaju will definitely try his best to protect Hellion Vivian's soul and neglect you instead. I want you to take advantage of this gap to do everything. Go bring Hellion Vivian to me. With her blood, the divine exorcism seal can be completely activated. Yes. Elder Ming grinned. His eyes gradually turned blood red in the gloomy darkness. Outside the main hall, Elder Jean looked back. The more he thought about it, the stranger he felt. He decided to voice out his doubts. Elder Wu, don't you think that young master seemed to be holding back when he spoke to us this time? Elder Wu's eyes darkened as he looked to the west. Young master has always been mysterious. This is nothing. But this time we can't simply force Hellion Wei Wei's soul out of her body and call it a day. The third prince has cut off all the benefits in the provincial capital. If this goes on, think about it carefully. What will happen to you and me when he takes the throne one day? If we investigate the fire in the palace back then, both of us won't be able to escape. What do you mean, Elder Wu? Elder Wu's voice turned cold. Drag the third prince down as well. With the retired emperor's protection, the third prince won't be dragged down so easily. For these elders to be able to sit in their current positions, each one of them had their own wisdom. Elder Jean naturally had his own ideas. Elder Wu chuckled and lowered his voice. What if the emperor wants the third prince to die? You want to use the Hellion Vivian incident to pin the crime of treason on the third prince? Elder Jean quickly understood what his colleague meant, but he still felt that it was inappropriate. It's not that easy. Elder Wu turned around and looked at him. Everything depends on the person. The third prince married a possessed person into the palace. This itself is a great taboo of the royal family. In addition to his actions during this period, I'm afraid it would be difficult for the emperor to tolerate him even if he wanted to. All these years His Majesty has always been like us, wanting to live forever. For this reason he has been addicted to pills. Others might not understand his true intentions, but how could Elder Jean not understand? He doesn't want to be like the retired emperor, handing over his power to others when he's old. Now that the third prince has performed so well and the fifth prince and the empress are no longer around, there's no one to help him maintain the balance in the court. According to His Majesty's character, it's hard for him not to want to make a move on the third prince, just like how he acquiesced to us attacking the Hellion family. Elder Wu said the last sentence very slowly. So slowly that Elder Jean's eyes darkened. What do you want to do? Elder Wu knew that he had agreed. He leaned over and whispered something in a low voice. After hearing this, Elder Jean nodded slightly and praised, "You're indeed Elder Wu to be able to come up with such a beautiful plan. His Majesty hasn't been peaceful these past few days. Once the provincial capital's matter is settled, many officials have begun to clamor for the third prince to be the official crown prince. How do you think he can sleep peacefully?" Elder Wu laughed as if victory was already in his hands. Now that the fifth prince has been deposed and the empress is imprisoned in the cold palace, it's normal for a prince without any power to make a last stand. It's normal for him to bring soldiers into the palace to force the emperor to abdicate. When that time comes, the third prince will definitely use his power in the military to protect the palace. However, the situation is different now. Since His Majesty already has the intention to get rid of him, then he can be the one to protect the palace but not the third prince. Once the third prince makes a move, my men will directly sneak into his palace to hide the dragon robe. When that time comes, His Majesty can completely say that the third prince is the one with the true intention of rebelling. Elder Jean stroked his beard. What if the third prince doesn't move a single soldier? He's an extremely profound person. After so many years I've never been able to see through him. Although the plan this time is perfect, it's a little rushed. It's not impossible for him to see through the knack of it. If he doesn't move a single soldier and just stands in the imperial court without moving at all or giving orders, then this matter will be even easier to handle. Elder Wu was full of pride. Once I get my hands on it, I'll directly point out in the imperial court that these so-called rebel soldiers are merely using the fifth prince's name. In fact, the third prince is the one who's actually forcing the emperor to abdicate. Otherwise, Why wouldn't he move a single soldier to protect the emperor? Elder Jean gave a thumbs up as he listened. This plan is beyond words. If he moves, then he's plotting a rebellion. If he doesn't move, then he's plotting something. Unless there's someone who can help him block this attempt to force the emperor to abdicate, otherwise, His Majesty will definitely be ruthless to the third prince this time. That's right. Elder Wu smiled sinisterly. Elder Jean thought for a moment and said, if we want this to be foolproof, it's best to first pin Hellion Vivian's crime on the head. This way the third prince will be too busy to think of anything else. Rest assured, Elder Jean. Elder Wu smiled. On the day of the wedding, Hellion Vivian did not make a fool of herself because of the appearance of the fire Qilin. During the chanting of the scriptures tomorrow, whether it's you, me, or her and the third prince, all of us will have to stay in the palace. With His Majesty around, no one will be allowed to bring any spiritual beasts in. When that time comes, Hellion Vivian will have no choice but to die. Clatter. The emperor sneered and threw the memorial in his hand to one side. His voice was clearly filled with anger. Another memorial that's forcing me to appoint the crown prince as soon as possible. I'm still on the throne and they're already so bold. Crash. All the memorials on the sandalwood table were swept to the ground by the emperor's sleeve. Eunuch Gao, who was serving the emperor, was so frightened that he trembled. The emperor could not stand anyone now, what more a servant. He kicked the eunuch to vent his anger. The retired emperor is also a muddle-headed old man. Instead of doting on his son, he chose to dote on his grandson. Chapter 541. The Crown Prince. The emperor laughed gloomily. Without my approval, he will never be the crown prince in his life. Chaoyang Hall was destined to be restless tonight. Eunuch Gao dragged his aching body. No one could understand the grievance in his heart. He had been by the emperor's side for 30 years, but he was worse than a beast. In my opinion, the emperor can't bear it anymore. Nangong Lai, who had been staying in the temple of ancestral worship all this time, directly told Beligaju after receiving the news. Aju, I always feel that there must be something behind this. You should be careful these days. Even though the emperor has been obsessed with alchemy all these years, the palace is still his after all. Beligaju sat on the wooden chair with his legs slightly crossed. His handsome side profile was as cold as ice. Nangong Lai didn't say much. After all, he knew Beligaju best. When he was young, Aju was not liked by the empress. Now that he had grown up, even the emperor was wary of him. Nangong Lai shook his head and sighed in his heart. When he left, it was already late at night. Bailey Jiaju was shrouded in the night fog as he returned to the palace. The servants below could almost see the coldness in his eyes. One after another, they bowed their heads and served him on his left and right. When he approached the dragon bed, there was finally some warmth in his long and narrow eyes. It was not because of anything else but because of the person lying in the cage. Her wrists were locked by an iron chain. She slept peacefully with one side empty, as if deliberately left a space for him. If it were anyone else, they would have been unable to stand him being locked in such a cage. Except for her. Beligaju felt something warm in his chest. He leaned over and took the only person he had into his arms. Hellion Vivian, who was sleeping, was very docile. She leaned over according to Beligaju's intention, and even put her arm naturally on Hellion Vivian's waist. Beligaju curved his thin lips and kissed her on the top of her head. Now she was completely defenseless against him. Previously, in order to obtain this person, he did not hesitate to go against his style of doing things and set up that marriage contract, just to get her into bed with him. When they first got married, she was still distant from him. Even when the two of them were lying together, she would stick close to the wall, afraid to touch him. Now she was so obedient that he couldn't bear to part with her. That was why one had to be patient and skillful in rearing a cunning prey like a fox. Oh. Wei Wei was moved by the cold aura of his body. That exposed part of the fair skin on her abdomen, which was still rising and falling slightly along with her breathing, was like a defenseless little beast. Is it daybreak? Bailey Jiaju was indeed a qualified breeder. He stretched out his hand and pulled her over again. He patted her back and said in a deep and pleasant voice that sounded like a pre-recorded lullaby, "Not yet. Go back to sleep. Then wake me up when the sun rises. I want to make beans for you." She basically murmured the last few words. Beligaju looked at her. Even his usually thin lips had some lingering gentleness. The moonlight shone through the wooden window and shone on the two people sleeping in each other's arms. It was an indescribable combination. Achoo. She didn't know if it was because she had woken up too early, but Hellion Vivian sneezed as soon as she got out of bed. Her foot missed and kicked the head of the bed, hurting herself. Beligaju was standing by the window with a fur-colored towel in his hand. When he heard the noise, he looked over. When he turned to look at Hellion Vivian, the lines of his neck were stretched and there was a strong sense of abstinence. Come here. Hellion Vivian subconsciously swallowed her saliva and looked to the other side. What are you doing? Looking at your feet. Beligaju said as he handed the towel to the servant beside him. Hellion Vivian nodded. Just as she was about to bend down to put on her shoes, someone grabbed her waist and easily pulled her up. When she reacted, she was already in the air and sitting on the sandalwood dressing table. Beligaju's hands were on both sides of her. He lowered his body, and his beautiful long and narrow eyes were at the same level as Hellion Vivian's. His voice was deep. Lift your feet. In this position, Hellion Vivian obviously wouldn't lift her feet. She just looked at him and said, "It doesn't hurt. It's just a touch." "It's red from a touch." Beligaju moved closer and almost forced her into a corner. His presence was so strong that Hellion Vivian couldn't ignore it. She didn't know if it was because of the morning light shining on his face, but it made his face look more handsome and three-dimensional. Hellion Vivian thought to herself that she finally saw what it meant to have a natural flash effect. His Highness was a monster no matter where he was. "You're looking at me like this. Do you want me to continue what I did last night?" Beligaju chuckled and moved closer to her ear. His voice was very long. Hellion Vivian's heart skipped a beat. She wanted to push him away, but he pushed her back. Beligaju turned his face slightly and leaned towards Hellion Vivian. The closer his eyes were, the more her heart beat. Hellion Wei Wei's fingers clutched her clothes and subconsciously leaned back. "Wait a minute." Beligaju didn't seem to give her a chance to escape. His right hand was free and he skillfully held the back of her head. His thin lips pressed against hers. The slightly cold touch and the familiar sandalwood smell were very intoxicating. Hellion Vivian gasped for breath. Her entire body was in his embrace. When the kiss landed on her neck, she reached out to stop him. "No, I still have to make a basket of bean paste buns for you and Xiaoqi. He'll wake up later and you can eat them together. Don't you like bean paste? Can warm your stomach." Hearing this, Beligaju's fingers loosened. He looked at the bright and beautiful little face in front of him and couldn't help but be stunned. When did he say that he liked bean paste? She was acting on her own again. Although she said so, the indifferent royal prince ate more than anyone else after receiving the bean paste buns. It was enough to show that the bean paste buns were to his liking. The rest of the food was taken away by little Seven. He held a chopstick in his hand and another in his mouth. He sat in front of Hellion Wei Wei and Bailey Jiaju in a dignified manner. He held a pair of chopsticks in his left hand and sat in a domineering manner. Eunuch Sun took advantage of this time to mention to Beligaju the ministers who wanted to come in recently. He wanted to let His Highness see more of them. It would be helpful in the future. Beligaju looked at the residue on Xiaoqi's face and frowned. His tone was as indifferent as usual. "Reject them all." Eunuch Sun was stunned and whispered, "But the Ministry of War is also among them." Chapter 542. Reject it. Beligaju glanced at him and wiped his fingers with a white handkerchief. He didn't explain further. Eunuch Sun's head drooped even lower as he looked at Hellion Vivian. He probably wanted Hellion Vivian to persuade him. After all, if he didn't see anyone, he wouldn't be able to do well in the court. Wasn't His Highness very smart in the past? Why couldn't he understand this time? Eunuch Sun waited anxiously and gestured with his mouth. Hellion Vivian stood up. While taking the bowl, she smiled at him. Eunuch Sun is really loyal to His Highness. He even made a face. "Wang Fei, don't make fun of us." Eunuch Sun tapped his foot and looked inside. "His Highness won't see anyone. What should we do in the future?" Hellion Vivian sniffed the bean paste bun in her hand and said in a very soft voice, "Eunuch Sun, do you think His Highness should see these officials now? The situation isn't right." Eunuch Sun paused. "The situation isn't right?" After we came back from the provincial capital, whether it was the Ministry of Appointments or the Ministry of War, They all said that they want the Emperor to appoint His Highness as the heir apparent as soon as possible. It's been 4 or 5 days but the Emperor hasn't made a move. The corners of Helian Wei Wei's mouth carried a smile as she took a bite of that steaming hot red bean bun. This only proves one thing. The Emperor doesn't want to appoint an heir apparent so early. If His Highness goes to make friends with the officials of the Ministry of Appointments and the Ministry of Defense at this time, he will be inviting trouble for himself. Naturally, it's better not to see these people. It will also prevent the Emperor from thinking too much. When Eunuch Sun heard Helian Vivian's words, a layer of cold sweat immediately appeared on his forehead. Wang Fei means that the Emperor has already started to. I don't mean anything. Helian Vivian picked another apple from the basket and spun in a circle. But I think His Highness just doesn't want to see them. If he wanted to see them he wouldn't care about these things. The closer she got to Beligaju, the more Helian Vivian knew that the outside world's sanctity was fake. The real him was afraid of dirtying his hands with blood. People said that he was ruthless. But in Helian Vivian's eyes he was a little prince without a childhood. Although he had some tricks up his sleeve she liked him very much. If he didn't have any means to protect himself, wouldn't he be waiting for death in a place like the Imperial Palace? What's more, how could he be blamed for this? Even the Emperor couldn't tolerate him, let alone other people. Third sister-in-law, what are you talking about with Eunuch Sun? The little one lifted his head with a bean bun in his mouth. Beligaju followed his gaze and looked at Helian Vivian. Helian Vivian smiled and raised the apple in her hand. I'll ask Eunuch Sun to be careful. The next time he comes he'll bring more fruit. I can make fruit yogurt for you and your third brother. Fruit yogurt? The little one nodded with a serious face. Not bad, it sounded delicious. Helian Vivian was amused by his little adult appearance. She patted his head and sat back beside Beligaju. Beligaju looked at her indifferently. So, Eunuch Sun will definitely be more careful in the future? What the princess said, what the prince wants, this old servant will definitely be more careful. Eunuch Sun was smart. After a while he went out and sent everyone away. His words were good, neither unfamiliar nor friendly. Beligaju naturally knew what the two of them were talking about. He looked down at the little one who was picking snacks and dried fruits for him. A faint smile appeared on his thin lips. Helian Vivian happened to see that smile. She looked at the dried mango in her hand in confusion and asked blithely, "You like to eat this? Then I'll leave it to you in the future." Beligaju pulled her over, raised her hand and kissed it. This silly fox, he had to watch over her no matter what. Helian Vivian smiled brightly and let him kiss her. She looked very naughty. Do you find that I'm good to you? Don't always lock me up in the future. Let me lock you up too. Okay. Then I can be more good to you. Wait, what did you just say? Helian Vivian suspected that there was something wrong with her ears. Beligaju reached out and held her waist. His voice was charming. Come back tonight. I'll let you lock me up for a night. How about that? So easy to talk to? Helian Vivian slowly narrowed her eyes. Bailey Jiaju curled his lips into a faint smile. Isn't it to make you treat me better? I want twice as many locks as usual. In order to prevent him from playing tricks, it had to be like this. For Helian Vivian this was an opportunity no matter what. To be honest, a man like Beligaju, any woman who saw his restrained and cold appearance would want to lock him up. This man was very suitable for dark things. For example, handcuffs or guns that could kill people. Helian Vivian had wanted to tie him up for a long time. As the queen of firearms, it was rare to see such a suitable man to tie up, so her hands were very itchy. Unfortunately, the difference in strength between her and the enemy was too great. In terms of insidiousness, she couldn't compare to a certain highness. Now that he took the initiative to deliver himself to her, of course she couldn't refuse. Thinking of this, Helian Vivian happily began to plan what kind of lock to use to lock up the most handsome man in the world at night. Only then would she be able to fully display his porcelain-like exquisite beauty. She didn't even notice the smile on her face. Beligaju put his slender fingers on her head and couldn't help but smile again. She was only tied up once and she was so happy. It was really easy to get rid of, Your Highness. As if he had something to report, Shadow walked in from outside. When he saw Helian Vivian and Little Seven, he had a hesitant expression on his face. Helian Vivian knew that they were going to talk about business, so she called Little Seven over. Let's go, we're going outside to get some sun. Little Seven reached out his hand and pulled on Helian Vivian's sleeve. Beligaju said in a faint voice. Wait for Shadow to finish his report, then we'll go out together. Hellion Vivian looked back and smiled. She had always felt that there were some things that he didn't want her to know. Why was it an exception this time? In fact, there was no exception this time. Shadow's report was undoubtedly bloody. For Beligaju, he didn't want her to see the things that anyone could see. But on the other hand, he desperately wanted her to know that he was that kind of person. He would do anything, and his hands were stained with blood. Your Highness. This was the first time Shadow saw such an expression on His Highness's face. He hesitated whether he should say it or not. Beligaju's handsome face was indifferent, and his voice was emotionless. Say it. Yes. Shadow lowered his eyes and said in a low voice, the few eminent monks that the elders found have all been dealt with. According to your Highness's instructions, none of them were left alive. When Hellion Vivian heard this, she glanced at Beligaju. You had people kill those monks who entered the palace to chant scriptures? Beligaju's hand that was hidden in his sleeve tightened. His slightly cold voice carried a hint of self-mockery. What? Do you think that this Highness is too cruel? Chapter 543. Hellion Vivian was silent for a while before she said, wouldn't it be more sinful to kill these monks? So what? Beligaju clenched his cold fingers. He regretted asking Ing to speak. Wasn't it obvious? He looked perfect on the surface. In fact, he didn't know how to do anything other than killing people and scheming. There was no need to differentiate between sinful and not sinful. If it was in the past, he would directly go to the temple where these monks came from and slaughter them. But now, it's nothing. Hellion Vivian chuckled and interrupted his thoughts. I just feel that I should go to the hidden spirit temple again and burn some incense for you. As she spoke, she raised her eyes and hooked her arm around Bailey Jiaju's. She smiled at him and said, next time, leave this kind of thing to me. Your hands are so beautiful, don't get them stained with blood. Besides, those monks originally came for me. They came to the palace to quell the chaos. If you kill them, how are you going to explain it to the emperor? Is this what you want to say? Beligaju's deep eyes seemed to be stirred up by layers of ripples. It was different from the usual cold, deep heat. He didn't believe it before. But now he believed it. In this world, there would always be a person who could make you forgive all the hardships you have suffered. For him, Hellion Vivian was that existence. Hellion Vivian nodded. Is it wrong to say this? That's right. Bailey Jiaju smiled slowly. He leaned over and kissed her on the lips. This kiss came too suddenly. Hellion Vivian suddenly froze on the spot. Her nose was full of the man's unique mint smell. Her heart beat a little faster. There were so many people around. In addition to Little Seven, there was also Eunuch Sun and an Ing. Hellion Vivian just tasted that charming and slightly cold sandalwood scent. She reached out and pushed him away. The tips of her ears were red. Can you pay attention to your image a little? Who asked you to seduce me? Beligaju snickered. When other people hear Shadow's report, they would always label me as the devil. But you, on the other hand, are protecting a devil like me. Hellion Vivian wiped the blush from his kiss. She didn't even raise her head and directly replied, if I don't protect you, who will I protect? You are my man. Beligaju curved his thin lips and picked her up. Then I'll have to trouble madam. Hellion Vivian shrugged. That's nothing, but killing a few monks shouldn't solve anything. Wang Fei is wise. And Ing coughed twice and finally found his voice. This time the House of Elders has put in a lot of effort. They invited 3 groups of eminent monks in a row. We only killed the first group. Although we didn't leave any traces, it will be difficult to do it again. After all, it was the emperor's idea to invite the eminent monks into the palace. Hellion Vivian nodded. Tell an Ing to come back. There's no need to kill those eminent monks. But, an Ing looked at Beligaju. Beligaju's slender fingers carelessly twirled Hellion Vivian's hair and nodded without a trace. Only then did an Ing reply, yes. You're in such a hurry, it shouldn't be just for this matter, right? Hellion Vivian took a sip of tea and smiled. Tell me all about it. I'm actually quite interested in His Highness' affairs. An Ing looked at Beligaju again and said, the informant from the Ministry of War has sent news. The Empress's former subordinates have been restless recently. Today they even gathered together. I don't know what they want to do. The Empress's former subordinates? Hellion Vivian's eyes narrowed and her voice sank. Even if she was a transmigrator, she knew that something was about to happen. The most likely thing was that they were plotting a rebellion. Hellion Vivian's fingers paused for a moment. Then she stood up. However, Bailey Jiaju only listened quietly. There was not a single ripple on his handsome face. And Ying tentatively asked, "Your Highness, shouldn't we make some preparations? First, we should transfer the garrison outside the city to wait outside the Meridian Gate." "No need." Baligaju reached out and put down the teacup in his hand. His voice was faint. "Go and investigate who organized the Empress's former subordinates. The fifth prince is under house arrest, the Empress is locked up in the palace, and the Murong clan has long been disbanded. Now that they've come out to make trouble, no matter how you look at it, there's a problem." And Ying responded with a yes, but he was still worried. "Your Highness, since there's a problem, then they must have come prepared. Is it really okay if we don't transfer the garrison?" "At this time we can't transfer the garrison." Bailey Jiaju's voice was very flat, as if this matter had nothing to do with him at all. "The troops stationed in the city are supposed to protect the safety of the capital. They should be obeying the Emperor's orders. If I really have the ability to touch them, even if I helped Imperial Father block the rebels who tried to force the abdication, Imperial Father would still blame me for this matter. He might even directly pin the crime of rebellion on me because a prince shouldn't have led the troops into the palace." And Ying was dumbfounded. The Emperor won't do this, right? Why wouldn't he? He's just taking advantage of the situation. Baligaju slowly turned his sleeves. And Ying was anxious. "Then Your Highness, what should we do? We can't just watch those people kill their way into the palace, right? At that time, won't the Emperor say that you didn't do anything?" "It's more than just not doing anything." Baligaju curved his thin lips. "All right, you can leave now. I have a way to deal with this matter. Tell all the shadow guards no matter what happens, don't move." And Ying didn't say anything else but "Don't move? Is this really okay?" Time passed by little. Unlike the peace in the palace, the sound of the wind blowing through the grass outside the palace was especially loud. In a secret tea house in the west of the city, where few people came and went, a few shadows gathered and were secretly plotting something. The general with the sword pointed at a scroll of the palace's inner courtyard and lowered his voice. "When the sky turns dark, someone will open this door for us in advance. At that time we just need to quietly go in and directly approach the Chaoyang Palace. We can only succeed, we can't fail." Yes. This was their only chance. The Murong clan had lost their leader, and the Empress was suppressed in the cold palace. The Emperor didn't care about their excessive friendship, and the third prince wanted to kill them all. So they had to do this. According to the Elder's plan, even if they didn't succeed in forcing the third prince to abdicate. As long as the third prince sent his army to stop them, the Emperor would definitely not tolerate him and add the crime of rebellion to his name. It was worth it to drag the third prince down with them. Chapter 544. At noon, the eminent monk entered the palace. The three grand elders were by his side. They were there to appease the souls of the dead and purge the evil in the palace. "Elder." When they entered the palace, the guard who received the palanquin went up to Elder Wu and whispered something to him. Others could not hear it clearly, but Elder Wu heard it clearly. He nodded with a smile on his face and walked to a dark corner. His eyes were filled with venom. He would like to see how Baligaju would deal with this. All these years, the Elder compound had always been restricted. Every time they did something, they had to consider Baligaju's counterattack. Now that there was such a great opportunity, they might as well get rid of him while the Emperor was distracted. They would like to see how he would bite them without his status as a prince. Elder Wu. Eunuch Gao stood at the entrance of the palace. He was here to receive the guests on behalf of the Emperor. Only then did Elder Wu come back to his senses. He smiled calmly. "Eunuch Gao, is everyone here? We can't leave anyone out. The master said that the evil aura in the palace is too strong recently. If we don't get rid of the evil aura for the concubines and highnesses, I'm afraid we won't have peace." "Don't worry, Elder. The concubines and highnesses will be here as long as His Majesty gives the order." Eunuch Gao replied with a smile. "It's just that it's still early and it's not time yet. In a while the hall will be lively." Elder Wu nodded. When he looked down, the corner of his lips curled up slightly. He thought to himself gloomily. Hellion Vivian, no matter how capable you are this time, I'm afraid you'll have to stay in this palace for an hour and be tortured by the scriptures. I reckon you'll show your true colors in less than an hour. The sound of the blessing music slowly rang out. Unlike the past, this time the music focused on peace and harmony. Beligaju gently twisted the jade pendant on his waist. His eyes were looking at the cloudless sky. His handsome side profile was as cold as a glacier. Have you found out? Yes, Shadow said softly. It's the Elder Compound's idea, but Beligaju raised his eyebrows. But what? I don't understand. How are they going to break in? And Ying's head was very low. Looking around, there were countless big and small palaces in the Imperial Palace. It would not be easy to break in. Bailey Jiaju smiled casually. How do we break in? Of course, it's a collaboration between the inside and the outside. Otherwise, it would be hard for the Emperor to accuse me of plotting a rebellion. And Ying didn't know what to say. Since ancient times, even a vicious tiger wouldn't eat its own cubs. But in the Imperial family this was unavoidable. Beligaju put down the jade pendant he was fiddling with in his hand and quietly looked back. With an imposing manner that could change the weather with a flip of his hand, he said, no matter what method they use, as long as the palace gate of Chaoyang Palace is not broken, you don't have to show up. Let them kill for fun. Since the Emperor doesn't want me to move, then you don't have to rush to protect me. During this period of time His Majesty has been muddle-headed. It just so happens that seeing some blood will also wake him up. After listening to Beligaju's words, Shadow finally understood what His Highness meant. If they didn't make a move, the ones who died were either the rebels or the Emperor's Imperial Guards. Anyway, they wouldn't be the ones who suffered losses. By the time those rebels really killed their way to Chaoyang Palace, they would have used up most of their strength. By that time, when they appeared again, they could simply clean up and solve this matter. It was undeniable that His Highness's idea this time was too insidious. Those elders definitely didn't expect His Highness to use this trick. Moreover, the ones who would send the troops would not be the Imperial Guards who could be used as excuses by them. Your Highness. From afar, Qing Zhan hurried over and even forgot to salute. Chaoyang Palace sent a message saying that everyone in the Imperial harem has to participate in the eminent monk's recitation of Buddha. Even the princes and princesses can't avoid it. The princess has been brought to Chaoyang Palace by the people over there. I saw that the princess didn't look good. I was afraid that something bad would happen, so I took the initiative to inform Your Highness. Please, Your Highness. Before Qing Zhan could finish her words, she felt a piercing cold wind blowing past her face. When she looked up again, Beligaju was no longer in front of her. Beligaju slowly clenched his fists as his long sleeves fluttered in the wind. Even his deep eyes that were usually calm were overflowing with a chilling coldness. How dare they? Swoosh. Beligaju reached out and brushed away the light fur cloak that was handed to him by the servant. His slender figure was as fast as a shadow. There was no anxious expression on his face, but his eyes were faintly overflowing with an unusual light. In the darkness it seemed like something fell. The strands of hair in front of his forehead successfully covered his eyes, so that no one could see the deep demonic nature. However, the smile on his sickly pale handsome face was so elegant and bloodthirsty. If his precious prey was harmed, he would make all of them regret being born into this world. Elder Ming? What's wrong with you, Elder Ming? Elder Wu looked at his colleague who was trembling beside him and frowned in confusion. The elder surnamed Ming tried his best to control the reaction in his blood. He shrunk his arm and hid his black fingernails under his long sleeve. He gave a fake smile and said, It's nothing. It's just that my body hasn't been feeling well recently. I can't stand the wind. What was that wave just now? What was it? Elder Ming's expression was uncertain. He lowered his eyes and covered the red light that was overflowing from his eyes. Elder Wu did not notice his abnormality. He only replied, Then Elder Ming should be careful. After that he retracted his gaze and looked at Elder Zhan. Elder Zhan nodded at him subtly and guided him to look at Hellion Vivian who was walking in. Elder Wu laughed. His voice was not very loud, but it was loud enough for everyone to hear. Why is the third princess consort unwilling to come to the main hall? Is there something that you don't want the eminent monks to know? You shut up. Before Hellion Vivian could speak, Little Seven blocked Elder Wu with a cool expression. That innate domineering aura actually caused Elder Wu to involuntarily take a step back. What can I not want the eminent monks to know? Hellion Vivian held little Seven's hand and asked with a light smile, Elder Wu's arrangement is strange. The recent cases in the Imperial Palace have all happened by the river. Elder Wu did not let the eminent monks go to the river to chant sutras and Buddha, but called us all to the main hall. Is there something that you want to do? Elder Wu had always been a thoughtful person. When he heard Hellion Vivian's words, his expression did not change at all. His pure white robe looked just as usual, chanting sutras and Buddha in Chaoyang Hall to expel the bad luck from the Imperial Consort's body is the consideration of the eminent monks. This is to prevent any evil from entering the inner palace. It's just chanting sutras with the eminent monks for an hour, yet the princess consort is so against it. It's easy for others to think too much. This old man has to ask, is there something that the princess consort does not want people to know? Chapter 545. Ever since I came in, Elder Wu has been saying that I'm hiding something. Hellion Vivian brushed the dust off her fingertips and said calmly, Elder Wu, do you have any evidence? Hearing this, Elder Wu slowly narrowed his eyes. Sure enough, he could not underestimate this girl anymore. Not only was she eloquent, but she also knew how to avoid the important and dwell on the trivial. However, her methods were fine for dealing with matters in the residence, but if she wanted to compete with him in the main hall, she was simply courting death. Elder Wu slowly opened his mouth. I don't have any evidence, but I've always had a doubt in my heart. Everyone in the capital city is spreading rumors that since the princess consort fell into the river, her temperament has changed drastically. She is no longer as arrogant and despotic as before. Even the things that you create are amazing. It's as if your soul has been taken away by some evil spirit. How do you explain this, princess consort? What does Elder Wu want me to explain? Hellion Vivian smiled. It's because I'm too arrogant and despotic that I've become a joke for 7 years. When grandfather passed away, although I was still young, I didn't forget the ancestral teachings of the Hellion family. The Hellion family has never produced cowards. If Elder Wu wants to see my arrogant and despotic side, then it's hard to say. As long as the emperor agrees, I can beat you until your head is full of blood. As for the things that I create, you should ask my teacher, Grandmaster Jizun. He has taught me too well, so it's hard for some people to find fault with me. The princess consort is really good at talking. Elder Wu narrowed his eyes and clenched his fists. Hellion Vivian smiled calmly. Elder Wu is too kind, I'm just a little arrogant and despotic. You. Elder Wu clenched his fists and released them. A smile appeared on his face. I didn't believe in this matter at first, but after seeing the princess consort's attitude, I started to have doubts. Since the princess consort said so, why don't you just agree to recite the scriptures? This way you can prove the princess consort's innocence. Hellion Vivian paused for a moment, but before she could say anything, Minister Wu is right. The emperor, who was sitting on the main seat, opened his mouth in a deep voice. Perhaps it was because he had been taking pills for a long time, but his complexion looked worse than the average person. The bags under his eyes were extremely heavy and his hair was jet black. He especially looked like a drug addict from the modern era. It's just an hour of chanting Buddhist scriptures with an eminent monk. If you continue to refuse, the taste will change. This was a special time, so Hellion Vivian naturally wouldn't disobey the emperor's orders. She glanced sideways at Elder Wu before speaking to the emperor. Since your majesty has given the order, Wei Wei naturally wouldn't dare to refuse. However, Elder Wu doesn't have the slightest evidence, yet you claim that Wei Wei's soul was taken away by some evil creature. Isn't that too overbearing? Wang Fei, please don't dislike this old man's attitude. Possession is not a normal matter. If everything is normal with Wang Fei when this matter is over, this old man will personally apologize to you. When Elder Wu saw that Hellion Vivian's words were getting weaker and weaker, his eyes were filled with pride. Princess consort, please. Hellion Vivian's clear eyes darkened. The little one held the bean paste bun in his mouth and looked left and right. Just as he was about to start fighting, Hellion Vivian stopped him. If Wang Fei still doesn't move, there will be a real problem. When Elder Wu's voice fell, many people were already looking in their direction. There was a faint fear in their eyes. I heard that the person who possessed the body likes to suck blood the most. Look at those palace maids who died in the imperial palace, didn't they all have their blood sucked dry? Do you mean that Hellion Vivian is really, who knows? We'll only know when the eminent monks recite the scriptures later. Hellion Vivian held the little one's hand and took a step forward. She then knelt on the spot that belonged to her. Third sister-in-law. The little one held the bean paste bun in his hand in a dignified manner. Have a bite of the bean paste bun first. Don't worry, I promise third brother that I'll protect you. Hellion Vivian smiled and pinched his bun face. I'm not worried. With Shao-Chi around, what's there to worry about? I'll pass on your words to third brother. The little one took out another bean paste bun from his chest. While his third brother was not around, he asked very seriously, Third sister-in-law, to be honest, am I more handsome and awesome than third brother? Hellion Vivian held back her laughter. What do you mean? Otherwise he wouldn't have asked me to dance all the time. He's just jealous that I'm more handsome than him. The little one took a bite of the bean paste bun angrily. Humph. Hellion Vivian felt more and more that these two brothers were naturally arrogant. She reached out her hand to stroke their fur. Then she heard countless scripture chants in the palace. She couldn't be more familiar with that mantra. Again and again it drilled into her ears. Elder Wu watched this scene with a vicious gaze. She would not be able to hold on much longer. Calculating the time, the third prince and the retired emperor should be arriving soon. He really wanted to see the expressions on those two people's faces if they knew that the third princess consort that they had carefully selected was an evil being who had been possessed. However, Elder Wu's smile did not last for more than a minute. Beligaju, who was strolling in from outside, grabbed his neck immediately. Beligaju was too fast. He was so fast that no one was prepared for it. All they could see was a shadow flashing past their eyes. When Elder Wu came back to his senses, he realized that his whole body was lifted up. Your Highness. Cough cough, what are you doing? Elder Wu tried his best to breathe, but he could not get rid of the fear in his heart. That feeling of suffocation made him disregard his image and shout at the Emperor, Your Majesty. Please save this old official. The Emperor's face showed his displeasure. Third brother. Put Elder Wu down. I can put him down if you want. Beligaju smiled faintly. He looked gentle, but he gave off a bloodthirsty aura. He has to give me an explanation for slandering my people. Elder Wu, you're just an elder at most. You're supposed to be a subordinate who shares the burden of the imperial family. What right do you have to threaten a princess consort? Of course, Elder Wu knew how difficult it was to deal with this person. He was not afraid of the emperor at all. He might really be strangled to death by him. No, he must think of a way. Elder Wu's eyes turned and he tiptoed. His face started to turn green and he kept coughing. I promised the princess consort. Cough cough, if the princess consort is not possessed, I will apologize to the princess consort. Don't you want to know if the princess consort is really possessed? Chapter 546. I'm not interested in your speculations. Beligaju turned around and glanced at the little one beside Hellion Vivian. His eyes darkened and his voice slowed down. He let go of Elder Wu and slowly tidied his robes. However, since the princess consort has promised you, I'd like to see what's going on with this preposterous idea of possession. Preposterous? Elder Wu clutched his neck and coughed violently. He thought to himself, when you see the shadow of a demon appearing behind Hellion Vivian, you won't find it preposterous anymore. Go and tell the eminent monks to chant louder. Yes. In an instant, the Buddhist chants in the hall became louder. Hellion Vivian's fingers paused. She held Shao-Chi and sat steadily. Elder Wu looked at her straightened back and laughed coldly in his heart. I'd like to see how long she can hold on. As for the third prince who was standing next to him, it was time for him, the god's favored one, to have a taste of being slapped in the face. No matter what, he was still an elder. The third prince did not give him any face at all. Just wait and see. Once I'm done with Hellion Vivian, the next person I'll deal with is Beligaju. Your Highness, you'd better watch carefully. Elder Wu smiled and looked as if he was thinking for Beligaju. Usually, a person who possesses a body will sweat profusely and a black shadow will appear behind them. Although we can't catch the black shadow, we can still see it with our eyes. Your Highness, don't be distracted and miss out on any interesting scenes. Beligaju raised his eyes and looked at him slowly. That look was extremely cold. It was so cold that Elder Wu's scalp went numb. Then he heard the person speak calmly. If there's no interesting scene to watch, I'll use Elder Wu's head as an example. It was just a few words, but it seemed to have lowered the temperature of the surroundings by a few degrees. Hearing this, Elder Wu narrowed his eyes even more. He knew from the beginning that no matter who was the emperor, the four great elders of the elder compound would always have the power that others could not have, and they would be loved and respected by the people. Only this third prince who did not listen to reason or force would one day destroy everything they had. That was why he made such a huge decision today. It's almost time now. Elder Wu strolled toward Hellion Wei Wei. Noticing the beads of sweat on her forehead, the smile on his face deepened. Princess Consort, don't force yourself. Not even half of the time has passed. If you're really uncomfortable, why don't you say it yourself? You'll be punished anyway, why don't you let yourself suffer less? Elder Wu, where did you see that I'm? Hellion Vivian smiled gently as she pinched Shao-Chi's hand. I heard the Buddha's voice and was chanting along. I took the opportunity to pray for His Highness and sweat a little. Elder Wu, you're making a mountain out of a molehill. I hope that the Princess Consort is right. You're only sweating a little. Princess Consort, you'll have to wait patiently. In less than an hour, the eminent monk's Buddhist teachings will not end. I'm really worried that the Princess Consort won't be able to take it. Elder Wu stood up again with a smile on his face and asked the monks to increase the volume of the chanting. In his heart, Hellion Vivian was already at the end of her rope. She was like a grasshopper who was about to die and wanted to jump a few more times. But time passed slowly. Apart from sweating, Hellion Wei Wei actually didn't have any other signs. This made Elder Wu unable to sit still. He whispered a few words to the eminent monks. Yuan Ming watched from the side and laughed evilly. Woman, you're really smart to have thought of such a plan. I bet that old man would never have dreamt of how you could sit there so calmly. There are many things that he wouldn't have thought of. Hellion Vivian's voice was lazy. Initially, I wanted to bribe those eminent monks. However, after thinking about it carefully, it's too dangerous. There are many of the elders' confidants among them. If I really took the silver, it would become evidence that they would not let me go. Baligaju did not arrange it this way because of this. Moreover, Yuan Xiaobai said that Shao-Chi is more powerful than the Fire Qilin. If he's by my side, he'll definitely be able to withstand the eminent monk's Buddhist chanting. Since he can withstand it, of course I'll use him. It seems that Shao-Chi is much more low-key than the Fire Qilin. Xiaobai's cold voice continued Hellion Vivian's words. If His Highness Shao-Chi is really him, then he's not low-key at all. You've been talking about him for so long, I don't even know which one it is. Hellion Vivian raised her eyebrows. In the end, which beast do you think Shao-Chi is? The little one's ears perked up. When he heard Hellion Vivian mention his name, he frowned in confusion. Then, as if he had figured something out, he turned his handsome face to the side and said domineeringly, Third sister-in-law, do you want to eat bean buns? Hellion Vivian. Indeed, Shao-Chi could relate anything to food. Third sister-in-law, don't be shy. If you want to eat, just tell me. I've brought a lot of bean buns. The little one said as he patted his small chest. The corner of Hellion Wei Wei's mouth twitched. He must have brought all the bean paste buns in the imperial kitchen here. How could he hide such a small body? Third sister-in-law doesn't want to eat. You eat. Hellion Vivian smiled and rubbed the little one's head. She felt the prickling sensation in her palm. Shao-Chi, isn't it time for you to shave your hair? The little one stopped eating his bean buns and stared at her with his round eyes. No. How can you not shave your hair? Won't the dean scold you? Hellion Vivian did not forget how strict the dean was with him. The little one shook his head. Third elder brother took me back, so I don't have to follow the dean anymore. Actually, I know that after I leave, those senior uncles who fought with me in the White Academy will miss me. Hellion Vivian. Then you're really thinking too much. It would be strange if they didn't welcome you. The more the adult and child chatted happily, the uglier Elder Wu's expression became. How could this be? It shouldn't be like this. At this time, shouldn't Hellion Wei Wei be unable to sit still and want to scratch her own face? Why did she look perfectly fine? No. Something must have gone wrong somewhere. Could it be that the eminent monks were chanting the wrong scripture? Impossible, he had checked every single one of them. Moreover, the eminent monks who entered the palace this time were the elder compound's trusted subordinates, so there should not be any mistakes. But why was there no change in Hellion Vivian at all? Faintly, Elder Wu seemed to have a bad feeling in his heart. Chapter 547. How long has it been? Elder Wu was obviously anxious. He turned around and asked the little eunuch beside him. Even his forehead was covered in a thin layer of sweat. Reporting to Elder, it's almost an hour. Once the hour was up, the eminent monks would stop chanting. If nothing happened to Hellion Vivian by then he... No way. He would never allow that to happen. At this moment, the little eunuch reminded Elder Wu, "Elder, it seems like it's time." Elder Wu turned around abruptly and glared at him fiercely. "I know very well whether it's time or not." The little eunuch did not understand why Elder Wu was so angry. He was so scared that he quickly shut his mouth. Elder Wu stared at Hellion Vivian's back. That was impossible. Something must have gone wrong. "I'm fine. I seem to have disappointed you, Elder Wu." Hellion Vivian smiled at him gently. The curve of her lips was like a slap to Elder Wu's face. He clenched his fists tightly, gritted his teeth and ordered again, chanted again. The eminent monks naturally listened to him, but there were inevitable pauses in the middle. The pauses would make his voice sound especially loud, so everyone looked in his direction. Hellion Vivian looked up and smiled. "Elder Wu, it's time. The eminent monks should be done exorcising the bad luck." "Elder Wu, are you asking the eminent monks to chant again and again because you want to pray for blessings or because you don't like me and want to accuse me?" Princess Consort is right. Nan Gonglai slowly walked in from the outside. "Elder Wu, what you've done is really suspicious of your purpose. You didn't even tell us about the exorcism in the Imperial Palace. Instead, you troubled the eminent monks outside the palace. Elder Wu, what you've done is against the rules." As he spoke, he raised his eyebrows and glanced at Beligaju. What he meant was, "See, I came in time according to your order." Beligaju's expression did not change in the slightest. His side profile was indifferent and his eyes were extremely cold. He also took a glance at Nan Gonglai. However, his glance was much more black-bellied than Nan Gonglai's. If one were to insist on using words to express what they were thinking, there were only 6 words. "Play him to death for this lord." Nan Gonglai looked into his eyes and could not help but gulp. He wondered how Elder Wu had offended Audiobook. He had actually given the death order so straightforwardly. Elder Wu was not aware of his situation yet, but he knew that inviting an eminent monk into the palace would offend the hall of worship. However, if Hellion Vivian could reveal her true form under the mantra, it would not matter what method was used. But he never expected that Hellion Vivian would be completely fine. "Your Majesty." Nan Gonglai was still acting like a noble young master. "If your Majesty thinks that the hall of worship cannot protect the peace in the palace, you can drive the Nangong family out of the capital at any time. As long as your Majesty says so, I will do it. You don't have to invite some eminent monks and embarrass the hall of worship." The clan of worship was not a small matter in the entire divine land. Hearing Nan Gonglai's words, the emperor no longer kept silent. His words were full of persuasion. "Allah, you think too much. I see that the hall of worship has been working day and night for the case. I don't want you to work too hard, so I agreed to Elder Wu's proposal. Besides, Elder Wu doesn't have any other thoughts. He is just worried that the palace will not be peaceful, so he wants to share my burden." "If so, what did Elder Wu find out?" Nan Gonglai stood there, full of evil charm. Elder Wu did not speak. Hellion Vivian stood up and brushed the thin layer of dust off her body. "Elder Wu found out nothing, but he refused to let me go. He kept saying that I was the one who possessed the body. He even had the eminent monks recite the soul-summoning mantra again and again." "Soul-summoning mantra?" Nan Gonglai frowned. He turned his head and smiled evilly at Elder Wu. "Elder Wu, I don't know much. Don't lie to me. I've been a priest for so long, but this is the first time I've heard that the soul-summoning mantra is used to pray for blessings. Are you trying to pacify your resentment, or do you want to make the palace more restless? Elder Wu is really bold to lie to His Majesty so blatantly. Aren't you afraid of being beheaded?" Elder Wu was calm and experienced after all. He would not be flustered by Nan Gonglai's series of questions. He turned his head and said to the emperor, "Your Majesty, I've already reported to your Majesty that I asked the eminent monks to recite the soul-summoning mantra. How can it be considered as lying to your Majesty? Your Majesty, please uphold justice for me." Indeed, Elder Wu has already explained this matter. The emperor had always been in a bad mood. He said perfunctorily, "Allah, you're all my officials. You're all doing this for the peace of the palace. I know all of this. Since Elder Wu has investigated and found nothing wrong, that's naturally the best. There's no need to say anything else. Nangong Lai narrowed his fox-like eyes. There was a hint of mockery in his drooping mouth, but he did not respond. However, Bailey Jiaju opened his mouth slowly. For the peace of the palace, we need sufficient evidence. Elder Wu has slandered my princess consort, shouldn't you admit your mistake? When he spoke, his posture was no different from usual. He was still tall and graceful with an unchanging authority and nobility. However, Elder Wu could feel a sense of superiority and absolute disdain from him. This was what he hated the most. The emperor looked at Elder Wu, then looked at Beligaju's cold face and Nangong Lai's dissatisfaction. He knew that if he did not show some attitude he would never forget about this. The imperial palace calculated the gains and losses in his mind. He changed his mind and pushed Elder Wu out. Since things have escalated to this point, Elder Wu, you should apologize to the juniors. It's not a big deal. Your Majesty. In just a moment, Elder Wu's face changed from being proud to pale. He was the third-generation elder. Everyone present knew about his status and prestige in the War Dragon Empire. Now His Majesty actually wanted him to bend his waist and apologize to Hellion Wei Wei, a junior, in front of so many people. This was even more unbearable than killing him. What's wrong? Hellion Vivian sat on her seat with her legs slightly crossed. She leaned back leisurely. Elder Wu wants to go against the imperial decree? Elder Wu, the emperor urged again. His voice was obviously lower than the last time. Elder Wu snatched the cup of tea from the little eunuch's hand and took a deep breath. As he walked toward Hellion Wei Wei, the muscles on his face were trembling in anger. At this very moment, all he wanted to do was to find a hole and hide in it. Chapter 548. I've misunderstood Princess Consort, it's all my fault. Elder Wu clenched his fists so tightly that his knuckles turned white. It was the first time in his life that he felt so embarrassed. Hellion Vivian glanced at him lightly. It's not a misunderstanding, it's a false accusation. It's better for Elder Wu not to accuse people without any evidence in the future. Elder Wu clenched his teeth and said, yes. Hellion Wei Wei smiled faintly as she took the teacup from his hand. Instead of drinking, she passed it to the little eunuch at the side. Her thin lips carried a smile as she said, I'll leave it to you. Elder Wu's tea is not that easy to drink. Even though Elder Wu was a person who could keep his composure, his expression turned ugly when he saw Hellion Vivian's action. She actually gave the tea that he offered to a eunuch. She was obviously humiliating him. Elder Wu took a deep breath. His hands were hanging by his sides so tight that the veins on the back of his hands could be seen. I'll let her be arrogant for now. When the soldiers enter the palace later, Beligaju will be in a dilemma and be accused of treason. I'd like to see how this Hellion Vivian and the third prince can still be so smug. When Elder Wu thought of this, his shrewd eyes were filled with viciousness. He straightened his back and wanted to retreat. Hold on. Bailey Jiaju's long and narrow eyes looked up and strolled to Wei Wei's side. His tone was neither fast nor slow. Old Wu, when you apologize to the princess consort, you don't need me to teach you how to salute, right? Once again, Elder Wu's expression changed. However, compared to the previous time, this time, it was much more genuine and gloomy. Third brother. The emperor, who realized what Beligaju wanted to say, reprimanded him in a low voice. Bailey Jiaju did not even look at him. He lowered his eyes and looked down at Elder Wu. His voice was cold and he only said two words, kneel. Third brother. The emperor stood up abruptly. Only then did Bailey Jiaju look up at him with his bright eyes. He still had a faint smile on his face as he said, since ancient times, the imperial family has always been respected. Father, you have allowed Elder Wu to be so unruly. Where is the dignity of our imperial family? Or does father think that the status of the elder courtyard is higher than the imperial family? The emperor narrowed his eyes, then turned around and said to Elder Wu, Elder Wu, third brother is right. You kneel. Your Majesty. Elder Wu still wanted to say something. The emperor didn't listen to him. He just waved his hand and that was what he meant. If there was anyone in this world who understood the emperor, was the emperor. That was none other than Bailey Jiaju. The emperor's greatest taboo was that the elder courtyard's imposing manner overshadowed the imperial family. What he had always wanted to do was to use both kindness and authority. However much love he could give the Elder Council, he would restrict them as much as he could, especially in front of the public. Of course, Elder Wu was aware of this. He clearly understood that he could no longer refuse at this point in time. If he refused, it would definitely arouse the Emperor's displeasure and suspicion. Then, the next part of the plan could not be carried out. Elder Wu bit the meat in his mouth and looked at Beligaju's face. Slowly, he knelt down. Nangong Lai smiled charmingly at the side. He patted Elder Wu's shoulder and said in a low voice, "Elder Wu, if I were you, I wouldn't provoke the imperial family like this. The elder courtyard has the guts. However, the scene of being slapped in the face is really... it's so ugly." Elder Wu's eyes darkened. The long sleeves under his fingers were still twisted by his grip. Hellion Vivian was impressed by His Highness's methods. He really wanted to play people to death. Looking at Elder Wu's face, he was so angry that he had probably never knelt before anyone in his life. Following His Highness was like having meat to eat. Seeing that Hellion Vivian was satisfied, Beligaju said coldly, "Elder Wu, remember this. If you do it again, it won't be as simple as kneeling." "Yes." Elder Wu said the word yes unwillingly. He stood up with a flick of his sleeve and walked back to his seat in big strides. His chest was still rising and falling. Elder Zhan stood beside him and said in a low voice, "Elder Wu, I think we should postpone our plan. The imperial family is really difficult to deal with. I'm afraid something will go wrong. No matter how difficult it is to deal with him, he can't escape today." Elder Wu calmed his breath and a cold light flashed in his eyes. "As soon as the sound of soldiers and horses is heard, the first person His Majesty will question will be the third prince. Just you wait, this will definitely be a good show." Elder Zhan also wanted to see Beligaju fail miserably. Thinking about it carefully, their plan was foolproof and there was no loophole at all. However, he saw that Hellion Vivian did not show her true colors even though it was clearly a foregone conclusion. Instead, it was Elder Wu who lost face. He could not help but mutter in his heart. However, as Elder Wu said, as soon as the sound of soldiers and horses is heard, no matter whether the third prince sends out his troops or not, he will not end well in the end. He will be treated as a prince guilty of treason by His Majesty and completely lose the right to be the crown prince. As long as he could defeat the third prince, what was a little risk? "Alright, sit down." After His Majesty finished speaking, he coughed heavily twice. When Eunuch Gao saw this, he immediately handed over a blood-red pill. His Majesty seemed to be very anxious, as if he needed that pill very much. He did not even hide it in front of everyone and directly swallowed it without even drinking water. After that, it was finally smooth. He took a deep breath and said, "Alai, you and Elder Wu are both virtuous ministers of the War Dragon dynasty. In the future you must be considerate of each other." As he said that, he turned to Elder Wu and asked, "Elder Wu, what's next?" Elder Wu stood up and said in a respectful manner, "Your Majesty, we just need to wait for the eminent monks to finish their rounds of chanting Buddhism and come back. Then everyone, let's wait in this palace." After His Majesty finished speaking, he glanced at Eunuch Gao. Eunuch Gao raised his voice and shouted, "Serve tea and pastries." In just a moment, the palace maids carrying food plates walked in. Their long dresses reached their ankles and their steps were light, not daring to make a single mistake. As the chanting of Buddhist scriptures gradually faded away, His Majesty raised the teacup in his hand. The people below responded one after another, drinking tea and eating pastries. Little Seven sat on Hellion Vivian's left side and followed her closely. He was munching on the bean paste bun he brought with him with a very cold expression. "Why aren't you eating?" Hellion Vivian found it strange. This was not the little one's style. Chapter 549. Lil Seven reached out and scratched his little ears. "It's too noisy outside. If I eat now, I'll have to stand up and fight later. I'll eat after the fight is over." As he spoke, he tilted his head and thought for a while. Then he said seriously, "Why don't you wrap them up for me? Otherwise the snacks will fall off when the fight starts later." As soon as the little one finished his words, there was a commotion outside. The Emperor was already angry because of Beligaju's attitude just now. Now his thick brows furrowed even tighter. "Go and see what's going on outside. Why is it so noisy?" "Yes." Eunuch Gao left after receiving the order. The two elders sitting in the hall moved their teacups away. They looked at each other and nodded. Hellion Vivian smiled when she saw their actions. Then she stood up and found an excuse to leave the hall with Lil 7. Before this, there were already concubines who could leave and the Emperor did not stop them. Therefore Hellion Vivian did not attract much attention when she left. Elder Wu saw it. However, after the failure of the soul enchanting spell, it did not matter if Hellion Vivian was here or not. It was good that she left. It would save her the trouble of saying anything to help Beligaju. As long as the third prince was in the hall, everything could be done. Elder Wu gulped down a mouthful of tea ferociously. Just wait and see, he would definitely skin Bailey Jiaju alive. Your Majesty. Your Majesty. Bad news. Bad news. Eunuch Gao, who had just walked out of the room, ran back in, panting heavily. The Emperor stared at him unhappily. What's the matter? Why are you in such a panic? Reporting to your Majesty. A group of rebels has come in from outside. They have started fighting with the Imperial Guards. Eunuch Gao's forehead was covered with a layer of sweat after he finished speaking. They will break into Chaoyang Hall soon. As soon as Eunuch Gao finished speaking, it was as if the pause button was pressed. In an instant the palace fell into a deathly silence. The sound of drinking tea and eating snacks completely disappeared. The concubines all froze. Even the Emperor was shocked. He was surprised as if he had misheard. What did you say? There's a group of traitors outside the palace. Shut up. Before Eunuch Gao could finish his words, the Emperor interrupted him again. His voice was cold and his pitch rose sharply. That's impossible. How can my War Dragon Empire's imperial palace be so easy to attack? But this was the news he had heard. When Elder Wu saw that everything was going according to his plan, he took a step forward and said, Your Majesty, since Eunuch Gao said that it's true, it must be true. The noise outside is indeed the sound of weapons killing the enemy. Yes. Eunuch Gao didn't know what to do. He could only nod his head continuously. The Emperor narrowed his eyes dangerously. With a wave of his hand, the teacup on the table fell to the ground. Who is it? Who had the guts to do that? Elder Wu lowered his eyes. I don't know who it is, but just like what your Majesty said, the Imperial Palace is so heavily guarded. There are countless palaces, not to mention that the War Dragon Empire's strongest Imperial army is guarding the front of Chaoyang Hall. It's impossible to rely on the traitors outside. Under normal circumstances, they would be killed before they could even enter the Imperial Palace. Since they were able to attack, it can only mean one thing. There's someone in Chaoyang Hall who is cooperating with them from the inside. Elder Wu, you mean? The Emperor stood up. His lips were deathly pale and his entire face looked somewhat gloomy. His eyes swept across the people in the hall one by one and finally fell on Bailey Jiaju. His eyes narrowed slightly. Someone wants to rebel? Elder Wu answered respectfully, I'm just guessing. After all, it's a big crime to say such a thing. I don't dare to say anything. However, there's one thing that I really want to know. At this point, Elder Wu paused and did not continue. Instead, he glanced at Beligaju. Bailey Jiaju's two slender legs were half-crossed. His expression was still noble and indifferent. His handsome side profile seemed to have been drawn by a brush. It was as if no matter what happened outside, he had no impression of him at all. The Emperor was looking at him as well. He retracted his gaze and said to Elder Wu, What's the matter? Elder Wu, just say it. I've heard someone mention it before. They said that they saw someone rushing to make something in the royal palace. The cloth was golden in color and embroidered with dragon claws. Elder Wu raised his head and looked at the Emperor as he spoke. Your Majesty, according to the ancestral rules, only your Majesty can wear golden silk. I'm curious. Why would the royal palace rush to make a robe of this color? A golden cloth with dragon claws embroidered on it. It was obvious that they were trying to rebel. The more the Emperor listened, the colder his face became. His eyes looked toward Bailey Jiaju. The thick black liquid in his eyes made people feel very uncomfortable. Third brother, how do you explain this matter? It's all nonsense. Beligaju replied calmly. His slender fingers twirled the teacup. He was neither anxious nor impatient, but he gave off a cold vibe. Before the Emperor could speak, Elder Wu cut in and began to retreat in order to advance. Perhaps someone saw wrongly, but the people below seemed to be telling the truth. It's inevitable that this old official would want to clarify things and find out the truth. If your Third Highness doesn't mind, This old subject suggests that we send someone to search your Third Highness chambers. This way, not only will we be able to suppress the vile rumors, we can also prove your Third Highness' innocence. Elder Wu, do you know how serious of a crime it is to randomly search a prince's bedroom? Bailey Jiaju asked in a cold voice. Elder Wu was thick-skinned as he shouted, I'm just thinking about your Highness' innocence. Since there's nothing in your Highness's palace, we should investigate further. We'll do as Elder Wu says. The Emperor glanced at Baligaju. His voice was so deep that it was almost emotionless. Someone searched the Jiuchong Palace to see if there's the golden robe that Elder Wu mentioned. Yes. The crowd retreated after receiving the order. The sounds of fighting outside the palace were still ringing. The Emperor's eyes could not be any darker. Elder Wu was very pleased with himself. He thought that no matter how smart Baligaju was, he would never expect that he had planned everything beforehand. A day ago he had already gotten someone to hide a set of dragon robes in the Jiuchong Palace. Although it was placed in an inconspicuous position, it could be found easily with a flip of the wrist. He wanted to see what Baligaju's face would look like when the dragon robe was brought over. Chapter 550. The atmosphere in Chaoyang Hall was getting heavier and heavier. The sounds of fighting outside were getting closer and closer. If this had happened in the past, the Emperor would have sent the third prince out to prepare for the battle. But today, everyone could feel the Emperor's deep distrust towards the third prince. All the ministers and concubines dared not speak. They only lowered their eyes, each with different thoughts in their minds. To be honest, with the third prince's current power, he could have rebelled long ago if he really wanted to. Why would he leave a clue behind and let Elder Wu get a hold of it? Presumably, the Emperor also understood this point. It was precisely because the Emperor also understood this that he acted like this. No emperor would want to keep a prince who was more popular than him. Therefore, even though Elder Wu was the one who suggested this, the one who really wanted to seize this opportunity and not let the third prince off the hook might be the Emperor himself, Elder Wu. The people who went to search returned quickly with joy on their faces. It was obvious that they had gained a lot from this trip to Jiuchong Hall. Elder Wu glanced at Baligaju with a smug look on his face. How was it? Did you find something? That person nodded. We entered the royal study. At first, the shadow guards tried to stop us. We thought they were acting suspiciously, so we barged in. As expected, there was a black package in the secret chamber of the study. They hid it very carefully. Elder Wu had indeed instructed his spies to wrap the fake dragon robe in a black bag so that the other party would not notice it. Now that the black bag was found, it meant that Bailey Jiaju would not be able to make a comeback this time even if he were to die. Your Highness, shouldn't you explain what's in the black package? Elder Wu's face was full of smiles. Your Highness, please don't tell me that you don't know either. Baligaju glanced at him indifferently. The corner of his mouth seemed to be curled into a mocking smile. Nangong Lai was smart. Although he did not know what exactly was going on, he could tell at a glance that Elder Wu had done something shady. When he looked at Bailey Jiaju, he could not help but reveal a worried look. He did not believe that Aju would hide the dragon robe. Because he knew better than anyone else that with Aju's power, if he couldn't wait and wanted to sit on the throne, he could use any method. There was no need to hide a dragon robe. But this kind of thing couldn't help but be planned in advance. Once the crime of keeping the dragon robe was confirmed, then Aju, Nangong Lai's brows wrinkled. For the first time, a ruthless coldness appeared on his unrestrained and bewitching handsome face. The Emperor sat on the dragon throne and coughed heavily. His eyes swept over the packages that the imperial bodyguards were carrying. His chest rolled. Good. Third brother, you really are my good son. Bang. The sound of another teacup shattering could be heard. However, the teacup brushed past Baligaju's hair and hit the wooden beam behind him. Baligaju's elegant and indifferent handsome face still carried a smile that wasn't a smile. He didn't move, and even his posture was the same as before. Only that pair of long and narrow eyes emitted a sense of oppression. It made the Emperor feel frightened. The Emperor seemed to have realized that his action was a little overboard. He took a deep breath and stood up from the dragon throne with his whole body trembling. This world will be yours sooner or later. Why are you so anxious? Hiding the dragon robe. I usually spoil you the most, but what about you? Was it also your idea to send in those traitors outside? What are you planning to do? Are you trying to force me to abdicate? Before Beligaju could speak, Elder Wu immediately knelt on the ground. Your Majesty. As a member of the House of Elders, this old official has always been responsible for protecting the country and its people. Since some things have already floated to the surface, this old official has no choice but to say it. Everyone present knows the third prince's attainments in martial arts. All these years, the imperial palace's security has basically been overseen by him. Now that the rebel army is outside and is about to attack, the third prince's shadow guards have not made the slightest movement. The royal family is still standing in Chaoyang Hall, and they don't have any intention to help. From the beginning I've said that the palace is easy to defend and hard to attack. There are more than 10 palaces. If you want to attack, you must have a detailed and comprehensive plan, otherwise you won't succeed. But today the rebels were able to sneak through the layers of walls and approach Chaoyang Hall. That can only mean one thing: someone in the palace is working with them from the inside. Now it seems that the person who is commanding the rebels is undoubtedly the royal family, who is most familiar with the inner court of the palace. A bunch of nonsense. Governor Chen couldn't hold it in anymore and stood up. Elder Wu, how can you insist that the royal family is a rebel just based on your own guess? You don't have any evidence and you're just making such a big accusation. If the retired emperor knows about this, do you think he'll let you off so easily? Elder Wu smiled and lifted his chin slightly. Lord Chen, don't use the retired emperor to pressure me. The retired emperor's health isn't good. He just went to the hidden spirit temple and I'm afraid he won't be back anytime soon. Even if the retired emperor comes back and sees the royal family's treacherous behavior, I don't think he'll help him. He'll only deal with it more decisively. Elder Wu is right. Elder Zhan also stood up, his face full of righteousness. The royal family's crime this time is no small matter. At this stage, Lord Qin is still trying to defend it. Could it be that you're involved in this too? Governor Qin turned around abruptly, his face full of anger. You, all of you. You're slandering me. As he spoke, he cupped his hands. Your Majesty, you must investigate this thoroughly. Your Majesty, please investigate this thoroughly. With Governor Qin as the leader, many ministers knelt on the ground. They wanted the emperor to consider this carefully and not wrongly accuse anyone. However, they didn't know that the more people begged for mercy, the more the emperor wanted to punish Beligaju. He narrowed his eyes slightly as he tightened his grip on the pill in his hand. Since when did the situation in the imperial court come to this stage? Half of the ministers were begging for mercy for the third prince. Did they know who was the real person sitting on the dragon throne? Nan Gonglai saw the situation and knew that it was not good. As a prodigy priest, he knew the emperor well. If not 100%, he knew at least 70%. The emperor had always been afraid of Aju, whether intentionally or not. He was worried that Aju's limelight would overshadow his. That was why when that happened, he didn't overly suppress the elder compound. It wasn't a good thing for a prince to show his kingly image too early. Aju was too qualified to be the emperor. That was why he was neglected since he was young. Now that so many people were kneeling and begging for mercy for Aju, according to the emperor's character, not only would he not spare Aju, he might even punish him more severely. Chapter 551. At the thought of this, Nan Gonglai turned around abruptly and glared at Beligaju, who was standing in the middle of the hall. He did not believe that Aju did not understand this. Third brother, these ministers have asked me to spare you. The emperor chuckled softly. The crime of treason is such a serious crime. Tell me, do you think I can spare you? Eunuch Gao was scared out of his wits at this moment. He was trembling as he waited beside the emperor. The emperor had no way to vent his anger on Beligaju. He kicked Eunuch Gao aside and scolded him indirectly. You really can't be tamed no matter how hard you try. Your Majesty. Elder Wu's eyes flickered slightly. Why don't you just bear with it this time, considering that the royal prince is still young? He's still young. The emperor was even angrier. He has the ability to keep the dragon robe for himself. Elder Wu knew that his plan had worked, so he did not say anything else. He just took a step back and could not hide the smile on his face. At this moment, the more people plead for mercy for the third prince, the more horrible his death would be. Everything was going according to his plan. Coupled with the sound of soldiers and horses outside, the emperor's real thoughts could no longer be suppressed. Presumably, even now, the third prince still doesn't understand how he died. That was why one should not always put oneself on a pedestal. Who knew when one would fall from the pedestal and in such an ugly way? Elder Wu shook his head and pretended to sigh. However, what he did not expect was, just at this time, Bailey Jiaju opened his mouth unhurriedly. His voice was cold and indifferent, carrying a unique ridicule. You've all finished speaking. Isn't it my turn to speak now? Although he used this sentence as a question, his tone was declarative. He stood tall and straight with a smile on his face. It was as if he could give advice to a chess game while talking. Elder Wu, is it because I have been too merciful to the people of the Elder Compound? Is that why you have the guts to frame me? Elder Wu looked up with a pained expression. Royal family, things have come to this. It's fine if you don't want to admit it, but why do you have to slander me like this? As one of the 4 grand elders, I have the responsibility to protect the country. Perhaps the royal family feels that this old official has exposed you in front of the palace, so this old official is guilty beyond redemption. But that is where this old official's conscience lies. If this old official discovers that someone has the intention to rebel and this old official does not report it to the emperor, then this old official has failed in his duty. Your Highness. I also don't believe that His Highness is such a person. But now that there are both witnesses and material evidence, who can understand the feeling in this old official's heart? Seems that I am still too gentle. Baligaju absent-mindedly turned the silver ring on his finger. Acting in front of me? Heh. His laughter was very seductive. It could even be said that it was deep and magnetic. However, the coldness that seeped out from it was enough to make everyone shudder. Elder Wu braced himself and turned his face away. He did not speak to Baligaju anymore. Instead, he spoke to the emperor. Your Majesty, you know very well what kind of thoughts this old official has. The people of the Elder Compound have worked hard for so many years, wholeheartedly for your Majesty, but we are always misunderstood. Now that your Highness thinks of this old official like this, I am really worried that if your Majesty does not punish the royal family this time, he will punish me and my family. Third brother. The emperor's face was completely gloomy. This is the Chaoyang Palace. How dare you be so presumptuous? Do you even respect me, the emperor, as your father? Bailey Jiaju unhurriedly brushed his robe. He was as indifferent and elegant as usual, but his tone was mixed with a kind of indescribable mockery. Father, aren't you a little too anxious to condemn me so quickly? Hearing this, the emperor's eyes narrowed dangerously. Elder Wu immediately continued the topic. The royal family, the dragon robe has been found. What else do you have to say? Dragon robe? Baligaju looked down at the black package on the ground. Just based on this? Elder Wu steadied his tone. It seems that your Highness will not give up until the royal family sees it for themselves. Guards, open this black package. Yes. One of the 2 bodyguards answered and bowed. Elder Wu raised his chin proudly, waiting to see how Baligaju would be rendered speechless. However, he heard a commotion. What is that? It looks like beef jerky. There should be candied dates too, right? Beef jerky. Candied dates. Elder Wu seemed to have realized something. He lowered his head and looked at the snacks scattered all over the ground after the black package was opened. His dark brown eyes shook back and forth. This is impossible. How could this be? This is impossible. He was the one who put the item away. How could a dragon robe turn into a pile of beef jerky out of nowhere? This black package was obviously the one that he ordered someone to hide in the Jiucheng Hall. Could it be? Elder Wu suddenly raised his eyes and looked at Baligaju's face with a pale face. It's him. It must be him. The person who hid the item was found out by him. He took advantage of the situation and changed the dragon robe inside. But why didn't he say that it was filled with snacks from the start? Moreover, he did not punish the person who hid the dragon robe. He even left that person to report to him. Elder Wu did not know why, but he began to feel extremely uneasy. The pride he had just now almost collapsed in an instant. He looked at the man standing in front of him. He had been like this from beginning to end. When he looked at him, it was as if he was looking at a clown who couldn't stand on the stage. This made Elder Wu feel an unprecedented chill. He could not help but take a few steps back. The expression on his face was numb. The emperor was stunned as well. He then frowned. Baligaju smiled faintly and picked up a piece of beef jerky. His long fingers that were wearing a black glove crushed it little by little, but his posture was elegant and handsome. What's wrong? Elder Wu seems to be very disappointed. Coincidentally, I wanted to ask Elder Wu about the snacks that I was planning to give to Little Seven. Elder Wu did not even open it to take a look. How could you be so sure that it contained the dragon robe? Elder Wu could not hold his ground with such a question. There was an uproar in the palace. Everyone looked at Elder Wu with a deep sense of inquiry. Elder Wu gritted his teeth and tried to keep his mind clear. There was still a chance. He had not completely failed. As long as the commotion outside the palace was still there, he had not lost. Since he had chosen not to send the army, even if the dragon robe was not a success, Baligaju would not be able to escape from this rebellion. Let's see what I have to say next. You're tuning in to the Biao's Wuxiao Chronicles YouTube channel. Don't forget to subscribe and join us on this journey to catch the most captivating stories.